Chapter 45-63. His eyelids were very heavy, as if he had to use all his strength to open his eyes. But in the end, Nye Tian still slowly opened his eyes, and the first thing that came into view was a very familiar face. Rushi. As his eyes opened, the face gradually became clear. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth twitched violently, and he trembled as he said a name. Rushi. The face in front of him had exquisite facial features and was incomparably beautiful, like a snow lotus. It was clearly Rushi. In an instant, as if a lifetime had passed, Nye Tian had an illusion that he had returned to his youth, back to the moment when he first met Rushi in Moyang City. Nye Tian, you're finally awake. The woman in front of him seemed a little nervous when she saw that Nye Tian had woken up, but she was also very happy and excited. Her beautiful eyes were a little moist, and her voice was also trembling slightly. Rushi, it's really you. At this moment, Nye Tian finally confirmed that he was not dreaming. He almost subconsciously sat up and hugged the person in front of him tightly. Rushi leaned on Nye Tian's shoulder, and she finally could not hold back the tears in her eyes. Do you know that the exquisite dice and Hongdo, the deep yearning for you? After such a long separation, perhaps it was for this moment that her eyes were brimming with tears. After a long time, the two figures slowly separated, looked at each other for a long time, and suddenly smiled through their tears at the same time. Nye Tian, how do you feel? Rushi suddenly remembered that Nye Tian had just woken up from a dream, and she could not help but ask nervously. I'm fine. Nye Tian had just reacted when he suddenly felt a tearing pain all over his body. It was as if there were countless tearing forces inside his body, causing his entire body to be in a state of being on the verge of collapse. However, he still endured the pain and shook his head indifferently. I'll go find Grandmaster Qing Qi right away. At this moment, Rushi suddenly thought of something, and she screamed and hurriedly rushed out. Nye Tian looked at the somewhat flustered figure, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and a surge of warmth surged in his heart. A moment later, Rushi returned with Qing Qi and Gu Ling Wuji. Nye Tian, you're finally awake. Qing Qi quickly stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over Nye Tian, and at the same time, he used his divine sense to sense the latter's condition. Did I sleep long? Nye Tian found it strange that everyone was so surprised to see him awake. He couldn't help but ask with a wry smile. The last thing he remembered before he fell into a coma was Chao Qiqing bringing him back to his room. After that, he couldn't remember anything else. In his opinion, he should have been unconscious for about half a day. Moreover, while he was unconscious, he didn't feel anything. He didn't even have a dream. You've been unconscious for half a month. Qing Qi confirmed that Nye Tian's aura was still stable. Although the power in his body was still rushing, it was already within a controllable range. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and said with a dry smile. Half a month. Nye Tian was shocked and immediately froze. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that he would unknowingly sleep for half a month. Rushi, when did you come? Immediately, Nye Tian thought of something and looked at Rushi and asked. She came not long after you were in a coma. For the past half a month, she has been by your side, not leaving your side. Before Rushi could speak, Gu Ling Wuji answered for her. Nye Tian's expression froze. He suddenly felt as if his heart had been pinched hard by someone, and it was extremely painful. Originally, he owed Rushi too much, but the latter still stayed by his side, which made him feel even more guilty. It's good that you're fine. Rushi, on the other hand, smiled gently. Then, Qing Qi and Gu Ling Wuji each examined Nye Tian, and their faces didn't look too good. Seniors, is Nye Tian okay? Rushi saw the expressions of the two, and her heart couldn't help but tighten, and she asked nervously. Nye Tian also frowned, but his heart was very calm. In fact, he had already sensed his body, and he had a basic understanding of his body's condition. Nye Tian, this time when you performed the heavenly beacon blood sacrifice, your lifeline was seriously damaged by the light of the clan. There was even a time when your body and soul were separated. Qin Chi let out a long breath and said, "Before you woke up, Gu Ling and I had already prepared for the worst." Prepared for the worst? Are you saying that I might never wake up? Nye Tian's eyes darkened, and he asked in astonishment. Yes. Qin Chi nodded and said, "The damage to your lifeline is too serious, and it has far exceeded the lifeline's own recovery ability. What's more troublesome is that you—" At this point, Qin Chi's face sank and he was somewhat speechless. "My 10th lifeline has been completely devoured, right?" Nye Tian, however, smiled and spoke for Qin Chi. Qin Chi and Gu Lingwuji's expressions froze at the same time, and they couldn't help but look at each other. Obviously, they didn't expect that Nye Tian's reaction to this matter would be so indifferent. The 10th lifeline, the ultimate secret of fate, and the most powerful lifeline in the world. With the 10th lifeline, Nye Tian almost had an immortal body. As long as he didn't receive a fatal blow, the 10th lifeline could be healed in a very short amount of time. Moreover, the 10th lifeline also gave Nye Tian an almost inexhaustible amount of power, and he could continue to fight without stopping. With such power, as long as Nye Tian grew up, he would be invincible. However, Nye Tian didn't seem to care at all after losing the 10th lifeline. This was really out of Qin Chi and Gu Lingwuji's expectations. I obtained the 10th lifeline by chance, and it saved me many times in crucial moments. Nye Tian looked at the two and smiled, and he said, "The 10th lifeline was obtained by the first Beacon Emperor, and now that it has been devoured by the light of the clan, it can be considered as returning to its rightful owner. The 10th lifeline is indeed very important to me, but it is not so important that I can't do without it. Plus, I have confidence in myself. Even without the 10th lifeline, I can still reach the peak." His words were light, but they were full of confidence and confidence. Everyone here couldn't help but be moved. Qin Chi and Gu Lingwuji glanced at each other again and smiled. It seemed like they had thought too much and underestimated Nye Tian's heart. Don't be happy when you get it, don't be sad when you lose it. Nye Tian's talent was extraordinary, and he had such a state of mind. He will definitely achieve great things. Nye Tian, even though your 10th life meridian has been devoured, it's also because of this that your other 9 life meridians, although severely damaged, aren't fundamentally harmed. They just need some time to recover. Qin Chi smiled and said with a comforting tone. Nye Tian nodded slightly and smiled as well. He had already sensed it before. Although his 9 lifelines were heavily damaged, they were all recoverable, so it was not bad. The 10th lifeline was equivalent to sacrificing himself to protect the other 9 lifelines at the cost of being devoured. Even Nye Tian's martial arts foundation was not greatly affected. He could basically recover to normal. Senior Gu Ling, have Devil's Knight and faction leader Ling returned? At this moment, Nye Tian suddenly remembered that he had been unconscious for half a month. Devil's Knight and Ling Shuangwuchen should have returned, so he couldn't help but ask. However, Gu Lingwuji's expression darkened. He frowned deeply and did not answer for a long time. Chapter 45-64. They're not back yet? Nye Tian's heart sank when he saw Gu Lingwuji's solemn expression. Yes. Gu Lingwuji nodded and said worriedly, "The Beacon's Emperor and faction leader Ling should have returned long ago, but there's still no news of them. They must have been delayed by something." Nye Tian frowned. Even though Gu Lingwuji was very tactful, he could still hear the seriousness of the situation. When Devil's Knight and Ling Shuangwuchen left, it was the most crucial moment of the Sky Beacon selection. They should have returned as soon as possible if they were done with their business. However, they had not returned yet. Clearly, they were in trouble. Nye Tian, you don't have to worry. The Beacon's Emperor and faction leader Ling are both outstanding people. They will definitely return safely. Gu Ling Wuji could see that Nye Tian was worried and comforted him. I hope so. Nye Tian nodded, a helpless expression on his face. It was useless for him to worry. He could only hope that Devil's Knight and Ling Shuang Wuchen could solve the problem in time. How's the sky beacon selection going? Nye Tian looked at Gu Ling Wuji and continued to ask. He had been in a coma for half a month. If the sky beacon selection went well, it should have entered the final stage by now. The sky beacon selection went well. It ended yesterday. Gu Ling Wuji finally smiled when he heard Nye Tian ask about the sky beacon selection. It ended. Nye Tian, however, was taken aback. He did not expect the sky beacon selection to end so early. Yes. Gu Ling Wuji nodded and explained. After the big battle half a month ago, only half of the original number of martial artists remained to participate in the selection. After that, we made a selection of those who remained. Some of the disciples of the aristocratic families, martial artists who originally belonged to sects, and those who were slightly less talented directly left. There were only about 10,000 martial artists who participated in the martial arts selection and the final selection. To ensure that everything went smoothly, no spectators were allowed to be present during the martial arts selection and the final selection. As a result, the sky beacon selection progressed much faster and ended earlier. That's good too. The Fengtian sect is indeed not suitable to recruit too many new disciples at once. Nye Tian nodded in agreement with Gu Ling Wuji's actions. Compared to the end of the Fengtian selection, what surprised Nye Tian even more was that the human emperor's palace and the heavenly Tao sacred pavilion did not come looking for trouble. Then, Gu Ling Wuji told Nye Tian some other things before leaving with Qing Qi. Only Nye Tian and Mo Rushi were left in the room. Rushi, did you come alone this time? Nye Tian asked with a smile as he looked at Mo Rushi with a gleam in his eyes. Senior Scarlet Life sent someone to bring me here. Mo Rushi did not react for a moment and nodded in reply. I mean, is it just you? Nye Tian smiled again and asked in a serious tone. Mo Rushi was stunned at first, but she immediately understood. However, a hint of worry flashed across her face. She then smiled and said, You want to ask about Fanner, right? Fanner. Nye Tian murmured and said, So that's our child's name. Yes. Mo Rushi nodded and said, I hope that his name will be ordinary, so I named him Niefan. Nye Tian nodded deeply, but there was an inexplicable pain in his heart. How could he not understand Mo Rushi's thoughts? However, how could he escape from everything in this world? It might not be difficult for an ordinary person to live an ordinary life, but it was the most difficult thing for a cultivator. Even if Mo Rushi named her son Niefan, how could he be ordinary? Mo Rushi had experienced too much, so she hoped that her child would be ordinary. But unfortunately, the word ordinary could only be her wish. Is Fanner here? Nye Tian's eyes trembled and he asked anxiously. He's with Senior Scarlet Fate and can't leave for the time being. Mo Rushi frowned slightly, but then she smiled and said, He's already 6 years old and has been cultivating with Senior Scarlet Fate, so he can't come. 6 years old. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He couldn't help but outline a tender face in his mind, and a warm smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, the next moment, Nye Tian frowned, as if he had realized something. He looked at Mo Rushi and asked in a deep voice, Is Fanner okay? You can see it. Mo Rushi was stunned again and silently admitted. Rushi, what's wrong with Fanner? Nye Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he directly stood up despite the sharp pain all over his body. Just now, he had already noticed that Mo Rushi's words were a little evasive, and there was always a lingering worry between her brows. In addition, Mo Rushi said that Niefan couldn't come because he had to cultivate, which was really a far-fetched reason. Nye Tian and Niefan had never seen each other before. Since Mo Rushi came, he naturally should come with her. There was only one reason why Niefan didn't come, and that was that his body was abnormal. Nye Tian, I actually came to find you this time because of Fan Er. Emo Rushi knew that she couldn't hide it anymore and could only sigh. Her eyes were a little wet as she said, Fan Er is afraid. Seeing Emo Rushi hesitating, Nye Tian hurriedly asked. At this time, he already had a bad premonition in his heart, and beads of sweat directly oozed from his forehead. I'm afraid his life is in danger. Emo Rushi finally said it, and tears silently fell from the corner of her eyes. What's going on? Nye Tian's face stiffened, but he had to force himself to calm down and asked solemnly. Emo Rushi suppressed the grief in her heart and slightly calmed her mood. Then, she said, when Fan Er was born, his body was full of runes like seals, and his body was very weak. Senior Scarlet Life found many people to treat him, but there was no improvement. After that, Senior Scarlet Life took Fan Er to cultivate, and as Fan Er's cultivation continued to improve, his body also became much stronger. But a month ago, the seals on Fan Er's body suddenly acted up. First, his skin cracked, and the wounds couldn't heal. After that, his whole body started to fester, and his whole body exuded a very pungent corpse aura. Senior Scarlet Life invited many saint alchemists, but no one could find the cause of Fan Er's illness. He could only let Fan Er take some pills every day, and rely on Senior Scarlet Life to personally suppress it. Only then was he able to barely maintain his life. At this point, Emo Rushi's tears fell again. No one could understand the heartache she felt when she saw her own child suffer that kind of inhumane torture every day. Nye Tian's face was cold and solemn, and his whole body stood stiffly, as if his heart was tightly gripped by an invisible hand. For so many years, Emo Rushi and Nye Fan had experienced everything, but Nye Tian was never there. And when Emo Rushi helplessly came to find Nye Tian, he was unconscious. Not only could he not help, but he even became a burden. Nye Tian was not a good husband, let alone a qualified father. Chapter 45-65. Nye Tian's heart ached and he felt guilty. He stood there in a daze and did not speak for a long time. Nye Tian. Emo Rushi called softly. Although she was trying hard to hold back her tears, they still fell silently. Let's go back now. Nye Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at Emo Rushi with a heavy expression. Go back? Then this place. Emo Rushi was stunned at first, and then she looked embarrassed. She had been in the Fengtian sect for half a month and had a general understanding of the situation here. She knew Nye Tian's identity and responsibilities at this time. Although the Sky Beacon selection was over, the Fengtian sect still had a lot of things to deal with. As the Beacon Emperor, it was indeed not appropriate for Nye Tian to leave at this time. The Guling sect master and senior Qing Qi are here. They will understand me. Nye Tian's eyes were slightly gloomy, and his eyes were full of unquestionable determination. For so many years, he owed Emo Rushi and her son too much, and it was time to make up for it. In any case, no matter what price he had to pay, Nye Tian must save his son. Nye Tian. But right at this moment, little Fat Cat's voice rang out, and its figure appeared, causing Emo Rushi to be taken aback. Fat. Nye Tian saw that Fat Cat's expression was a little strange, and immediately guessed that the latter should know something about Nye Fan. He could not help but tremble. Calm down first. Even if you go back now, you can't help that child. Fat Cat's face was a little gloomy, and she motioned Nye Tian not to be too excited. Fat, do you already know about Fan Er's situation? Nye Tian was even more anxious and asked nervously. Fat Cat had already grown 9 tails, so it was not surprising that she knew everything. Nye Tian guessed that Fat Cat must have heard something from Emo Rushi's description just now. The Fat Cat nodded solemnly, paused for a moment and then said, If I'm not wrong, that child should have a body of 10,000 calamities. Body of all calamities? Nye Tian and Emo Rushi's expressions changed at the same time, and they both exclaimed in shock. Yes. The Fat Cat nodded heavily and said, the body of all disasters is a kind of congenital martial body. It is also a kind of bloodline power, but it is a forbidden body of heaven and earth. What do you mean? Nye Tian suppressed the shock in his heart and asked anxiously. The taboo body of heaven and earth sounded like an existence that could not be tolerated by the heavens. I don't have many detailed memories regarding this. I only vaguely remember that the myriad worlds body originated from a powerhouse from the primordial era. The fat cat frowned and said, Gu Ling Wuqi told you about the ancient holy venerables before. I'm guessing that the expert from the primordial era should also be an ancient holy venerable. You're saying that the myriad world body came from one of the 9 ancient saint venerables? Nye Tian couldn't help but be stunned, and his face was full of astonishment. The 9 ancient saint venerables were powerhouses from the primordial era. How could they be related to Niefan? Moreover, the body of all disasters was the power of bloodline. If the body of all disasters came from that ancient saint venerable, then wouldn't it mean that Niefan had a bloodline inheritance with that ancient saint venerable? If that was the case, then it meant that Nye Tian's ancestor from the primordial era was an ancient saint venerable. Yes. The fat cat nodded heavily and said, This is only my guess. The 9-tailed chinchilla clan also appeared in the later period of the primordial era, so the memories before that are uncertain. The 9-tailed chinchilla clan's bloodline power was the inheritance of memories. However, even if the fat cat grew 9 tails and awakened all the memories of the chinchilla clan, it was not omniscient. Because the 9-tailed chinchilla clan only appeared in the later period of the primordial era, the chinchilla clan didn't have any memories before that. At most, they only had some information from other sources. Since the body of all disasters is the power of bloodline, why didn't Fan become stronger? Instead, his life is in danger? Nye Tian didn't think too much about it. At this time, his mind was only focused on saving people, so he hurriedly asked. Rumor has it that the body of all disasters is the forbidden power of heaven and earth, a power that can destroy the world. That ancient saint venerable cultivated a kind of forbidden cultivation method and finally cultivated the body of all disasters. The fat cat's eyes slightly narrowed as she said, And your son, Niefan, has the body of all disasters innate, which is stronger than the body of all disasters acquired. Those who have the body of all disasters are covered with the seal of all disasters. This is a power that ordinary people simply can't bear. Moreover, as the cultivator's body becomes stronger, the seal of all disasters will also become stronger. The reason why the child's life is in danger is that his martial body can't bear the power of the seal of all disasters. Nye Tian's face darkened, and he fell into silence for a while. He empathized with what the fat cat said. When he first awakened the godly demon body, his martial body also couldn't bear it. Every time he awakened it, he had to pay a considerable price. Niefan's seal of all disasters must be more terrifying than the godly demon body, but Niefan was far less powerful than Nye Tian. From this, it could be imagined how much pain Niefan was suffering every day. How can I save him? After a while, Nye Tian became cold. After a long time, he looked at the fat cat and said in a deep voice, It is said that the body of all disasters needs to go through 3 awakenings. During each awakening, one has to bear the human tribulation, earth tribulation, and heaven tribulation. The fat cat let out a long breath and said, What the child is experiencing now should be the first human tribulation awakening. Nye Tian's eyes trembled as he stared at the fat cat. When the human tribulation awakens, the child has to bear the extremely terrifying power of the human tribulation. The fat cat continued, This level of power can only be withstood by a martial artist at the level of Saint Emperor Tianzhu. Is there any way to resolve the power of the human tribulation? Nye Tian asked directly with his heart in his throat. No. The fat cat shook her head and said, The power of the human tribulation comes from the body of all disasters. It can't be resolved or transferred. It can only be borne by the awakened. Then what should we do? Nye Tion's eyes trembled as he asked anxiously. The only way is to improve the awakened's endurance. The fat cat said as she glanced at Nye Tion and said with pity, if you still have the 10th vital vein, with the power of the 10th vital vein, you can improve the child's martial body to the level where it can withstand the power of the human tribulation. What a pity! The 10th vital vein was the ultimate secret of the fate chart. It contained the purest and most essential life force. It was the most suitable to improve a martial artist's physique. But unfortunately, Nye Tion lost the 10th vital vein because of the heavenly blood sacrifice. There must be another way, right? Nye Tion, however, did not feel much regret and continued to speak. There is no other way. The fat cat frowned and shook her head helplessly. Based on his current knowledge, he really could not think of any other way to improve a martial artist's physique to that level. Impossible, impossible! There must be another way. Nye Tion's pupils shrank and he shook his head as if he had lost his soul. He did not want to admit the fat cat's words. How could he believe that his son could not be cured? Chapter 4566. In the room, Nye Tion quickly calmed down. However, the atmosphere was deathly silent and oppressive to the point of suffocation. Emo Rushi understood the gravity of the situation. Although she was holding on, tears still fell from her eyes. Fat, is it true that only the 10th vein can save Little Fan? After a long time, Nye Tion suddenly spoke. His eyes were so gloomy that it made people shudder. It was as if he had made a great decision. Nye Tion, what do you want to do? Little Fat Cat's face changed as it asked in shock. He felt that Nye Tion was about to do something crazy. I want to take back the 10th vein from the lineage's light. Nye Tion's eyes flickered as he said seriously. Take it back. Little Fat Cat was shocked, its face full of surprise. The 10th vein had been devoured by the lineage's light. How could he take it back? If the lineage's light can devour the 10th vein, then there must be a way to take it back. Nye Tion's eyes were firm. As he spoke, he was about to rush out. I'm going to find Senior Gu Ling. Nye Tion, calm down first. However, Fat Cat stopped Nye Tion. He frowned and said, the lineage's light is the ancient Saint Venerable's heart. The reason why it can maintain its active state is because it has devoured the life vein's power. What do you mean? Nye Tion was stunned. He didn't understand what Fat Cat meant. He thought that the lineage's light had been active because the ancient Saint Venerable's heart was strong. However, Fat Cat seemed to be saying that the lineage's light had been devouring the life vein's power. Fat Cat hesitated and said, actually, when you were preparing for the heavenly blood sacrifice, I noticed that there was something wrong with the lineage's light. I wanted to stop you, but I had already made up my mind to carry out the heavenly blood sacrifice. With your personality, you wouldn't give up no matter what I said. I can see that the light of the clan contains an extremely large amount of lifeline power. It seems to have devoured many people's lifeline power. Therefore, I am guessing that the Fengtian sect has been allowing the lineage's light to devour the power of the lifelines in order to keep the lineage's light active. Nye Tion's face sank. After a moment of silence, he said in a cold tone, you mean that the Fengtian sect has been using the lifelines of martial artists to feed the sect light? Using a martial artist's lifeline to feed the sect's light, this was simply a human blood sacrifice. Could it be that the Fengtian sect had been doing this all along? Yes. Fat Cat knew what Nye Tion was thinking, but she still nodded solemnly. I want to see the Guling sect master. Nye Tion found it hard to believe. He wanted to rush out, but he suddenly felt his qi and blood surging. His face turned red, and there was an explosive force in his chest, as if it wanted to rush out of his body. His whole body swayed violently, and he could no longer stand and fell down. Nye Tion. Emo Rushi quickly reached out to support Nye Tion. She was extremely nervous. I'm fine. Nie Tian took a deep breath, and his complexion improved a little. He struggled to support his body and said, Nie Tian, your lifeline is seriously injured. It will take at least 10 days to recover. Fat Cat signaled Nie Tian to calm down, then looked at Emo Rushi and said, Little girl, go and find Guling Old Man, yes. Emo Rushi was very worried about Nie Tian, but the latter also nodded, so she could only agree and turned to leave. Nie Tian calmed down a little and sat on the chair next to him. There was a sharp pain all over his body. After a while, Emo Rushi returned, followed by Guling Wuji. Nie Tian, what's the matter? Guling Wuji felt that the atmosphere was a little gloomy. He didn't know what happened, so he asked cautiously. Nie Tian didn't avoid it and directly told him Fat Cat's speculation. Guling Wuji wasn't too surprised after listening to Nie Tian's words, but his expression was slightly ugly. He nodded and said, The sect does let the light of clan devour the power of lifelines, but we only use those who have committed crimes in the sect as punishment. Don't you think it's too cruel to have one's lifeline devoured as a punishment? Nie Tian frowned and asked cold. Most of the people in the Fengtian sect were fate chart martial artists. The importance of lifelines to them was self-evident. Devouring their lifelines was almost equivalent to destroying their martial arts path, and the psychological impact on them would inevitably be on the level of collapse. The light of clan symbolizes the future of the sect, so it must always be active. This can't be helped. Guling Wuji understood why Nie Tian was so angry, but he could only shake his head helplessly. Is that so? Nie Tianling laughed and said in a deep voice, If the light of clan has to devour a martial artist's lifeline, then I don't need such a symbol. Nie Tian, please be mindful of your status, and be careful with your words. Guling Wuji frowned when he heard Nie Tian's words, and his expression instantly turned gloomy. Fat Cat saw that the atmosphere between the two of them wasn't right, and quickly said, Nie Tian, let's talk about the important things. Nie Tian's gaze darkened, and he took a deep breath before saying directly, I want to take back the 10th lifeline from the Light of Clan. Sir Beacon Emperor, what do you mean by that? Guling Wuji's expression darkened again, and his tone turned cold. Nie Tian glanced at Guling Wuji and was about to say something, but Fat Cat beat him to it and briefly explained Nie Fan's situation. Senior Guling, please think of a way to save Fan. As soon as Fat Cat's voice fell, Emo Rushi also spoke up. Guling Wuji frowned and glanced at Nie Tian, and suddenly fell into deep thought. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would be faced with such a situation. It seemed that Nie Tian wanted to take back the 10th lifeline not because he wanted to break ties with the Fengtian sect, but because of his son. However, the Light of Clan had always devoured lifelines, and no one had ever been able to take back a lifeline from the Light of Clan. This matter was really difficult to deal with. However, based on the current situation, if he couldn't take back the 10th lifeline, Nie Tian, the Beacon Emperor, would probably have to leave the Fengtian sect. Is there a way? Seeing that Guling Wuji didn't speak for a long time, Nie Tian couldn't help but ask. Guling Wuji's expression softened, but he eventually shook his head. The Light of Clan was too important to the Fengtian sect, and he really couldn't take the risk. Nie Tian's face was full of disappointment, and he didn't speak for a long time. Just now, Master Chinchilla said that the body of 10,000 calamities comes from the power of the ancient holy venerables. Perhaps other than the 10th lifeline, there is another way to restrain the power of the body of 10,000 calamities. However, after a while, Guling Wuji suddenly looked at Nie Tian and said with some uncertainty, What way? Nie Tian's eyes trembled violently, like a drowning man grabbing onto a life-saving straw. Since the body of 10,000 calamities comes from the bloodline power of the ancient holy venerables, is it possible that the bloodline power of another ancient holy venerables can restrain this power? Guling Wuji's eyes narrowed, and he expressed his thoughts. The bloodline power of another ancient holy venerables? Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed, and he couldn't react for a moment. That might be a way. Fat Cat reacted quickly, but then she frowned and murmured, "But where does the bloodline power of another ancient holy venerables come from?" Chapter 4567. Fat Cat understood what Gu Ling Wuji meant, but he was puzzled. Where did the bloodline power of the other ancient saint venerable come from? The body of infinite calamity was essentially the bloodline power of the ancient saint venerable. If there was another bloodline power from the ancient saint venerable, it could restrain the human tribulation power of the body of infinite calamity. However, how could the bloodline power of the ancient saint venerable be obtained so easily? The Fengtian sect is where the ancient saint venerable died. The power of the ancient saint venerable is scattered throughout the entire Fengtian mountain range. Gu Ling Wuji glanced at Fat Cat, but he was interrupted by the latter before he could finish. "You mean, the bloodline power of the ancient saint venerable is in the Fengtian sect?" Fat Cat was quick-witted. How could he not understand what Gu Ling Wuji was implying? Yes. Gu Ling Wuji's expression was a little unnatural, but he still nodded and admitted it. "Where is it?" Although Nye Tian did not quite understand what Gu Ling Wuji meant, he was still very excited and stepped forward to ask. "I don't know either." Gu Ling Wuji shook his head, which surprised Nye Tian. "Since you were the one who suggested it, how could you not know where it is? After the ancient saint venerable died, all the power of the martial body was integrated into the Fengtian mountain range through the formation." Of course, Gu Ling Wuji knew what Nye Tian was thinking. He could only explain helplessly, "But no one knows exactly where each part of the power is. You are also a divine array master, so you should have some understanding of the Fengtian mountain range formation. Based on your deduction, where should the bloodline power be integrated?" Fat Cat frowned and asked directly. "This." Gu Ling Wuji's face suddenly stiffened and he hesitated. He did not know where the bloodline power was. If he had to say it, it was only a guess. However, this matter was related to the life and death of Nye Tian's son. It was not a child's play, so he could not say it easily. "Sect Master Gu Ling, you don't have to worry too much at this time. Just tell me your guess." Of course, Nye Tian knew what Gu Ling Wuji was hesitating about and said directly. Gu Ling Wuji glanced at Nye Tian and finally nodded. "I speculate that the power of the bloodline is very likely to be in the underground beacon vein." Underground beacon vein. Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he heard those words. Wasn't that the place where Devil's Knight and Ling Shuang Wuchen went? That's right. Gu Ling Wuchi nodded slightly and said, "The power of the bloodline is born from a martial artist's martial body. Naturally, it should be hidden in the deepest part. The underground beacon vein was where the foundation of the sky beacon formation was located. It was also the core of the entire formation. The bloodline power should be there. Then I'll make a trip to the underground beacon vein." Nye Tian didn't care too much and immediately set off for the underground beacon. However, just as he took 2 steps forward, his body swayed and he was unable to stand. "Nye Tian." Emo Rushi hurriedly went forward to support Nye Tian and let him sit down to rest. "Nye Tian, your life meridian has yet to recover and your body is too weak." Gu Ling Wuchi looked at Nye Tian and said, "Let's go to the underground beacon vein after you've recovered." "No. I can't wait any longer." Nye Tian, however, sprang to his feet, a determined look on his face. How could he rest in peace when his son's life was at stake? "Nye Tian, I understand how you feel, but it's useless for you to be anxious now." Gu Ling Wuchi frowned and said in a deep voice, "In your current state, going to the underground beacon vein is suicide. Suicide is better than lying here and doing nothing." Nye Tian, however, had already made up his mind. "You!" Gu Ling Wuchi was so angry that his face turned red and he couldn't speak. Previously, he thought that Nye Tian was a near-perfect genius martial artist. Whether it was talent or temperament, he was top-notch. Why was he so abnormal today, and repeatedly making unbearable actions? In fact, this was not surprising. After all, it was related to his son's life and death. No father could remain calm. Nye Tian, the child should be able to hold on for a while. You are indeed too weak now. Even if you force yourself to go to the underground beacon vein, it is impossible to find the bloodline power of the ancient holy venerate. At this time, Fat Cat said, "In my opinion, it's better to wait for you to recover a little before making any plans." After that, Fat Cat looked at Emorushi. Emorushi naturally understood and said, "Yes, Nye Tian, Master Chinchilla is right. You should rest well. When you're better, we'll set off together." Nye Tian's face was gloomy and his eyes were trembling slightly. Like a trapped beast, his body exuded a frightening cold aura. After a long time, Nye Tian finally nodded and agreed to Fat Cat's proposal. "Well, we'll go to the underground beacon vein in half a month." Seeing Nye Tian nodding, Gu Lingwuji forced a smile and said, 3 days. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Nye Tian stood up again and said in an unquestionable tone, "In 3 days, I will go to the underground beacon vein." 3 days? Gu Lingwuji was stunned. In his opinion, 3 days would not make any difference to Nye Tian now. If Nye Tian still had the 10th lifeline, he might be able to recover in 3 days. Now that the 10th lifeline was gone and the other 9 lifelines were severely damaged, his recovery ability was greatly reduced. How much could he recover in 3 days? Then 3 days. However, at this time, Fat Cat also spoke and agreed with Nye Tian's words with a helpless expression. He knew that Nye Fan could not hold on for much longer. Perhaps 1 month was his limit. If they went to the underground beacon vein in half a month, Nye Fan would be long dead by the time Nye Tian and the others returned. Gu Lingwuji looked at Fat Cat. Although he wanted to stop him, he could not speak for a long time. 3 days were very torturous, but fortunately, it was over. 3 days later, outside a cave in the depths of the 9 extreme peaks, Nye Tian and the others appeared. "Nye Tian, there are still many things to deal with in the Fengtian sect. I can't accompany you to the underground beacon vein. Let Brother Qingqi accompany you this time." Gu Lingwuji looked at Nye Tian and nodded. He thought about the trip to the underground beacon vein for a long time and decided not to go in the end. On one hand, the Fengtian sect did have many things to deal with and someone must stay behind to take charge. On the other hand, after the incident at the clan light, there was obviously a gap between Gu Lingwuji and Nye Tian. It was inevitable that the atmosphere would be strange if they went together. Compared to Gu Lingwuji, Qingqi was obviously more suitable to accompany them. Moreover, his attainment in formations was also higher than Gu Lingwuji. "Yes." Nye Tian nodded and did not say much. "Brother Qingqi, I have told you everything I know about the heavenly beacon formation and the underground beacon vein. After you enter, be careful and don't touch anything under the beacon vein." Gu Lingwuji turned to look at Qingqi and said, "Also, if it is convenient for you, please help pay attention to the beacon's emperor and sect leader Lung. Gu Ling, don't worry. I am here." Qingqi already knew what happened and naturally understood the importance of this trip to the beacon vein. Although he was not sure, he still smiled and nodded with a confident look. Chapter 45-68. Gu Lingwuji looked at Qingqi and smiled faintly, not saying anything more. Nye Tian and the rest didn't waste any more time and directly entered the cave. "I hope everything goes smoothly." Gu Lingwuji sighed softly as he stared at the back of Nye Tian and the rest. Inside the cave, Nye Tian, Qingqi, and Emorushi slowly walked forward. Originally, Tang 13 and the rest wanted to tag along but were rejected by Nye Tian. Nye Tian was completely unprepared for this trip to the underground beacon vein. It wouldn't be good if there were too many people. In fact, Nye Tian only wanted Qingqi to tag along, but he couldn't persuade Emorushi, so he could only let the latter tag along. The cave was long and narrow, damp and cold, making one feel extremely uncomfortable. After walking for a few thousand meters, Nye Tian and the rest finally saw a wider cave. Following which, the three of them walked for another few hundred meters before a cave entrance with a radius of only a few meters appeared in front of them. This should be the entrance to the underground beacon vein. Qingqi looked around and nodded his head. "I'll go down first, you guys follow behind." Without saying a word, Nye Tian took a step forward and jumped into the cave. Qingqi frowned, feeling that Nye Tian was obviously a little anxious, no longer as calm as before. "Miss Mo, follow me, I'll bring up the rear." Qingqi nodded to Emorushi, signaling her to go first. Emorushi agreed and immediately leaped into the cave, followed by Qingqi. Inside the cave, Nye Tian slightly activated his astral soul wings, stabilized his body, and slowly descended. The surroundings were pitch black, and there seemed to be a mysterious force in the air that interfered with Nye Tian's perception, making it impossible for him to figure out how deep it was. Emorushi's figure arrived, following closely behind Nye Tian. She seemed a little nervous and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. "Nye Tian, there's an array in this cave that can weaken one's 5 senses. We have to be careful." Qingqi also arrived, reminding Nye Tian in a low voice. Nye Tian nodded and replied, but he increased his speed, diving deeper. Emorushi followed closely behind. Qingqi did not dare to be careless and remained vigilant. The three of them didn't know how long they had been sinking, but they couldn't find the bottom of the cave. They couldn't help but feel a little strange. How could this cave be so deep? It was like a bottomless abyss. Qingqi felt that the aura of the formation in the surrounding space seemed to have become much denser. It actually compressed his perception to a range of 10 meters. Nye Tian noticed this. Although he was very anxious, he still slowed down. "Be careful." At this moment, Emorushi suddenly exclaimed as she sensed something. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he instinctively activated the astral soul shield, instantly enveloping the three of them. Bang! In the next instant, Nye Tian felt as though he had collided into something. A muffled sound rang out as his astral soul shield almost shattered. After that, his speed slowed down significantly. Following that, Nye Tian saw that his surroundings were much brighter. His surroundings were actually crimson, as if he was surrounded by flames. However, the flames did not seem to be ordinary. They seemed to be surging like an undercurrent. "It's the underground lava layer." Qingqi immediately reacted. His expression changed abruptly as he was extremely shocked. Since they had entered the underground lava layer, they had sunk at least hundreds of thousands of meters. He never thought that this cave would be so deep. Could it be that this was a passage to the Earth's core? Nye Tian maintained the astral soul shield. Although there was lava all around, the heat still seeped in. Soon, the three of them were drenched in sweat. "Why is the temperature of the lava so high?" Qingqi frowned, a little puzzled. An ordinary lava layer would only have a temperature of a few thousand to 10,000 degrees, but the lava layer here was so hot that they almost couldn't breathe. A conservative estimate of the temperature was at least a few 100,000 degrees. Nye Tian didn't care too much about it. He continued to strengthen the astral soul shield with his astral soul shield. But soon, he discovered that the temperature of the lava layer was getting higher and higher. The heat kept seeping in, and the three of them felt like they were in a furnace. No, the lava layer definitely can't have such a high temperature. Qingqi shook his head while observing the surroundings, completely ignoring the sweat on his back. "Did you guys notice that our speed is increasing? It's like there's some force pulling us down." At this time, Emorushi spoke, a little puzzled. Nye Tian frowned and nodded. He also had the same feeling. "I got it." Suddenly, Qingqi seemed to have discovered something and shouted. Then, his expression changed as he hurriedly shouted, "Nye Tian, stop!" "Stop?" Nye Tian was taken aback for a moment, not quite understanding what Qingqi meant, but he still slowed down and prepared to stabilize himself. As soon as he stabilized himself, Nye Tian's expression changed. He was horrified to find that even under his control, he still couldn't stop the speed of their descent. There was no doubt that there was a huge suction force below that was pulling Nie Tian and the other two. Nie Tian, go to the side. Qing Qi seemed to have expected that Nie Tian would encounter such a situation and hurriedly pointed to the side and shouted. And Nie Tian responded and directly covered the astral soul shield with his astral soul wings, flapping them vigorously and rushing to the side. In this way, Nie Tian and the others no longer sank straight down, but sank diagonally. However, the strange suction force became stronger at this time. Although the power of Nie Tian's wings was very strong, they still drew an arc in the lava layer. After a moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt that the direction of the suction force began to change. First, it was below him, then parallel to him, and finally above him. Huh! Nie Tian was puzzled, feeling as if he was circling around a spherical object. After another moment, Nie Tian felt that the suction above seemed to have weakened a little, and the temperature of the surrounding lava layer began to drop. He immediately flapped his wings and tried to explore downward. Bang! Soon, Nie Tian heard a cracking sound, and then the lava around him disappeared, and he actually came to a void. Nie Tian stabilized his body, and the astral soul shield and astral soul wings were withdrawn at the same time, and then he retreated a few thousand meters. Only then did he see clearly that there was a huge fireball that was tens of thousands of meters above him, and the flames soared into the sky and spread in all directions like a scorching sun. So we didn't enter the lava layer, but this fireball. Nie Tian became cold, and he couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. They drew an arc in the fireball, and if they passed through the center of the fireball, they would most likely be directly burned by the blazing flames in the heart of the fireball. This fireball should be this world's sun star. Qing Qi's face was filled with joy after surviving a disaster, and he looked down and said. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he looked down, and the scene that entered his eyes caused him to be stunned for a moment. Below them was an expanse of verdant vegetation, trees stood like trees in a forest, and mountain ranges stretched on continuously. It was overflowing with vitality, and it was a scene of prosperity. It seemed that they didn't come to the underground, but entered a whole new world. Chapter 4569. Nie Tian and the other two were equally shocked as they looked down in disbelief. How was this the underground world? It was more like they had traveled through time and space and arrived in a brand new world. After a while, Nie Tian calmed down, but his expression was not good. He even wondered if they had come to the wrong place. This was not the underground beacon vein at all. Could it be that this fireball is a space-time tunnel? Nie Tian couldn't help but look at the huge fireball in the sky and wondered. Although everything here is different from what we imagined, I am very sure that we have not come to the wrong place. Qing Qi looked at Nie Tian and seemed to know what the latter was thinking. He smiled faintly and said. Mo Rushi's mouth twitched as she murmured, "We clearly came through the underground. How can this be?" Qing Qi's eyes narrowed and he laughed dryly. No one really knows what the underground world is like. I once read about the hypothesis of the underground world in an ancient book. The book said that our underground world is not solid, but hollow. There is another world under the ground that is very similar to our world. I always thought that it was a lunatic's dream, but now it seems that person has also come to a world similar to the one we are in now. Let's go down and take a look first. Nie Tian didn't care about the hypothesis of the underground world. He only knew that since they were already here, they should first understand the world in front of them. They didn't have much time. They must find the bloodline power left by the ancient Holy Venerate as soon as possible. The three of them landed outside a forest. The surroundings were overgrown with vegetation and rugged rock. It was no different from the mountains and forests of the Holy World. The three of them quickly found a mountain path. It was winding and quiet, like an immortal guiding the way, leading to the end of a strange peak. Nie Tian gazed at the mountain peak, which looked like a sharp sword that had been stabbed into the mountain range. Let's go take a look at this strange peak first. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched slightly as he said lightly. This mountain range stretched on endlessly, and this strange peak stood out like a crane among chickens. If there was any treasure here, it must be in this strange peak. Qing Chi nodded in agreement. The three of them walked along the path and soon arrived at the mountainside. At this time, the sound of a mountain song could be heard. It was distant and indistinct, as if it came from the horizon. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He turned around and saw a green-robed old man and a 17 or 18-year-old girl walking slowly from the other side of the mountain path. I finally see someone. Qing Chi seemed a little happy. He immediately stepped forward and greeted them enthusiastically. Hello, old brothers. Elder Qing Chi laughed heartily, but walked over at a leisurely pace. He first sized up Nie Tian and the others, then said with a chuckle, "Judging from your attire, you shouldn't be from Feng Ming Mountain, right? We're from out of town." Qing Chi nodded and smiled. He then pointed at the mountain peak in the distance and asked, "Big brother, let me ask you, is there anyone on this mountain peak?" "Of course there are people." The old man smiled and said, "This is Lei Yun Peak. There is a cultivation sect, the Feng Tian sect, at the top of the mountain. It is the largest force in our Feng Ming Mountain and is in charge of everything in Feng Ming Mountain." As he spoke, the old man's gaze once again swept across Nie Tian and the other two, and asked, "Are you guys going to the Feng Tian sect?" Feng Tian sect? Nie Tian and Qing Chi were stunned at the same time, and then looked at each other in disbelief. "Big brother, are you sure the sect on Lei Yun Peak is called the Feng Tian sect?" Qing Chi frowned and asked with a serious expression. Nie Tian was the beacon emperor of the Feng Tian sect, but there was actually a Feng Tian sect here. How could they not be surprised? "Of course I'm sure." The green-robed old man smiled and said, "The Feng Tian sect is in charge of everything in Feng Ming Mountain. Everyone in Feng Ming Mountain believes in the Feng Tian immortal." Feng Tian immortal? Nie Tian could not help but be taken aback, and could not help but ask, "Is he the sect leader of the Feng Tian sect?" The azure-robed old man glanced at Nie Tian, nodded and said, "Young man, you're not from here, so you can't casually call him Venerable Feng Tian. You must respectfully call him Venerable Feng Tian." Nie Tian nodded, but he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, this Feng Tian immortal was a little too high and mighty. The Feng Tian immortal was not enough, he had to call the Lord immortal. However, Nie Tian was even more curious. What was so mysterious about the Feng Tian sect, whose sect leader was called the Immortal Lord? The Feng Tian sect here was not a martial arts sect, but a cultivation sect. It was really strange. Immortals were not popular in the world of martial arts. Even those experts who had reached the peak of martial arts cultivation would not call themselves immortals. It was rumored that immortals were a group of experts who were born at the beginning of the world. Their martial bodies were different from ordinary people, and they did not cultivate martial arts, but another set of systems, the immortal Tao. The Feng Tian sect called itself an immortal cultivation sect. Could it be that the people of the sect did not cultivate martial arts, but the immortal Tao? "Thank you for reminding me, old brother. We are here to visit the Feng Tian sect." Qing Chi also had many questions in his heart. He nodded and smiled. He did not want to waste any more time and was ready to immediately go to the Feng Tian sect to see what was going on. "Visit." The green-robed old man smiled, stroked his beard, and said, "Since you are here to visit, do you have an invitation?" "An invitation?" Qing Chi was stunned for a moment, then shook his head and smiled bitterly. "No. You are from outside, and you do not have an invitation, so it is impossible for you to enter the Feng Tian sect." The green-robed old man shook his head and said with a smile, "The Feng Tian sect is not a place that anyone can visit. Not to mention people like you who are from outside, Even the city lords of Feng Ming Mountain who want to visit must send an invitation several months in advance. Only after receiving an invitation can they officially visit. So that's how it is. Qing Chi's face was bitter. He did not expect things to be so troublesome. From the old man's reaction, it could be seen that the people here respected the Fengtian sect very much, almost to the point of worshipping it as a god. It was likely that in their eyes, the people of the Fengtian sect were all immortals. You do not have an invitation, so you cannot visit the Fengtian sect. The old man smiled and said, "How about this, you follow me back to our village first and settle down temporarily. I will send an invitation on your behalf, and when the invitation comes, you can visit." Qing Chi could see that the green-robed old man was very sincere, but he frowned again and again. "Thank you, old mister, for your kindness, but our time is limited. We really cannot delay, so we will take our leave now." Without waiting for Qing Chi to speak, Nie Tian took a step forward and said directly. After saying that, Nie Tian turned around and walked in the direction of the Fengtian sect. "Goodbye." Qing Chi laughed dryly, cupped his hands towards the old man, and bid farewell. "It's another bunch of idiots seeking to become immortals." The green-robed old man did not stop them. Looking at the figures of Nie Tian and the others walking further and further away, he shook his head with a smile and muttered, "Unfortunately, you are too reckless. You want to enter the Fengtian sect without an invitation. I'll be back here tomorrow. Let's meet again then." After saying that, he left with the little girl behind him. Chapter 45-70. Nie Tian and the other two bid farewell to the elder in green and rushed to Thundercloud Peak along the dangerous mountain path. It was already evening when they arrived at the foot of Thundercloud Peak. The huge fireball high up in the sky did not move, but for some reason, its light dimmed as if it was about to set. Soon, Nie Tian and the others arrived at the entrance of the Fengtian sect. Beside the narrow mountain path, a 10-meter-high boulder stood, engraved with 3 majestic characters, Fengtian sect. This sect is really called the Fengtian sect. Nie Tian frowned. Although he was prepared, he was still a little surprised. The Fengtian sect of immortal cultivation is really interesting. Qing Chi could not help but smile. Looking at the stone steps in front of him, he could not help but look forward to it. He really wanted to see what this Fengtian sect of immortal cultivation looked like. Seeing that there were no guards around, Nie Tian did not hesitate and directly took a step forward. But the next moment a strange scene happened. Before Nie Tian's foot landed, he felt a powerful force rushing towards him. The rolling momentum made it impossible for him to avoid it, so he could only stand up and take it head-on. Bang! Then, with a muffled sound, Nie Tian seemed to hit something. His body shook violently, and he took a few steps back. He fell down a few steps and almost fell. Nie Tian steadied his body and frowned. He looked in front of him with a puzzled face, but he did not see anything. It seemed that there was an invisible wall in front of him. Not only was it invisible, but there was also no aura at all. "What's going on?" Qing Chi was also stunned and looked in front of him in disbelief. He had already sensed that there was no formation or restriction around. But the invisible door in front of him was real. What was going on? Nie Tian frowned and took a deep breath. He tried to sense the surrounding space, but he did not find anything unusual. He could not help but become gloomy. "Nie Tian, why don't you try again?" Qing Chi also didn't notice anything unusual. He turned around and said to Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded. Activating his astral soul shield, he slowly walked forward, approaching the entrance step by step. And when his astral soul shield came into contact with the formless gate, a strange scene occurred. The portion of the astral soul shield that entered the formless gate actually didn't suffer any obstruction. Instead, it disappeared, as though it had sunk into water. Nie Tian was puzzled, but he did not stop and continued forward. When he got out of the invisible door, he felt a powerful force coming at him, forcing him to retreat. What's going on? Qing-Chi frowned and stepped forward to investigate, but he did not sense any energy fluctuations. He was one of the top saint formation masters in the All-Heaven Saints world, yet he was unable to sense the strange, invisible door at all. It was far too strange. All of you back off. Nie Tian frowned and suddenly waved his hand, signaling Qing-Chi and Emorushi to step back. Qing-Chi knew that Nie Tian wanted to force his way through, so he hesitated for a moment but still retreated to the side. Emorushi also retreated, looking at Nie Tian from afar with a worried expression. Boom! Nie Tian took a deep breath and directly attacked with the sky sword. Sword intent surged and he slashed out furiously. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, pressing down on the invisible door. But what was shocking was that when the sword's shadow fell, it was like a clay ox falling into the sea, as though it was swallowed by the invisible door. Nie Tian's expression changed, and he couldn't help but feel a little angry. He slashed out 3 more times, but the situation was still the same. Nie Tian's expression turned ugly in shock. He had seen formations and restrictions with the devouring attribute before, but he had never seen one as strange as the invisible door in front of him. Although he couldn't sense anything from the invisible door, he had a feeling that the invisible door was like a bottomless abyss that could absorb all energy. Not to mention the current him, even when his cultivation had reached the 9th level of the Heaven Martial Realm after the blood sacrifice, he might not be able to shake the invisible door. Could this be an immortal formation? Qing-Chi frowned, and his old face was a little embarrassed. He followed Nie Tian to deal with the current situation, but he didn't expect that he would be helpless in the face of a door. It should be some kind of formation, but the formation source shouldn't be here. At this moment, Fat Cat suddenly appeared, looking curiously at the empty invisible door, and murmured, "The formation source isn't here?" Qing-Chi was taken aback, and he asked doubtfully, "If that's the case, how did the power of the formation get here?" He had set up formations for hundreds of thousands of years, but he had never heard of a formation that separated the power and the formation source. "I don't know either." Fat Cat shook his head, looked at Nie Tian helplessly, and said with a bitter smile, "It seems that we can only go back to find that old man." Wait for him to apply for a visit? Nie Tian frowned. Of course, he knew that the old man Fat Cat mentioned was the green-clothed old man they met during the day. Yes. Fat Cat nodded and then disappeared. Nie Tian looked at the invisible door in front of him, hesitated for a long time, and finally chose to listen to Fat Cat's suggestion. If they waited for the green-clothed old man to apply for a visit, even if everything went smoothly, it would take several months, and it would definitely be too late. Nie Tian wanted to find the green-clothed old man and find out more about the Fengtian sect from him. The 3 no longer hesitated and immediately went down the mountain. They soon arrived at the place where they met the green-clothed old man during the day, and decided to wait where they were. The night was long and torturous. Nie Tian found that the position of the huge fireball in the sky had not changed, but the light and flames were changing according to a cycle, extinguishing the night and illuminating the day. When the huge fireball faintly glowed, the sky also began to slowly brighten. Not long after, the green-clothed old man's figure appeared again. "You've returned earlier than this old man expected." The green-clothed old man walked over with a chuckle, without the slightest bit of hesitation. He already knew that Nie Tian and the others would return. Old brother must be joking. Qing-Chi smiled awkwardly. "The Fengtian sect's mountain gate is too tight, we can't get in." The Fengtian sect's mountain gate formation was set up by the first Fengtian immortal. No one in the entire immortal Qi continent can break it. The green-clothed old man laughed, waving his hand. "Come with me." Nie Tian and Qing-Chi looked at each other, then followed the green-clothed old man. Along the way, Nye Tian learned that the green-clothed old man's name was Yu Sanjing, and he lived in a small mountain village nearby, Gaoyu village, and was the village chief. Everyone in my village calls me Yu Gong, you guys can follow suit. Yu Sanjing smiled as he pointed to a quiet village with smoke curling up from chimneys. Look, that's our Gaoyu village. Nye Tian gazed at the peaceful little village, and couldn't help but feel a strong yearning in his heart. Perhaps, deep down, he also hoped to live an ordinary life with Mo Rushi. Let's go. Yu Sanjing smiled faintly, saying as he walked, not long ago, a few strangers came here. Come to think of it, there was a young man among them who looked a bit like brother Nye Tian. Devil's Night. Nye Tian's eyes trembled when he heard Yu Sanjing's words, and he blurted out the name. Chapter 45-71. Upon hearing Yu Sanjing's words, Nye Tian's first reaction was to think of Devil's Night, so he blurted out. That young man who looks similar to you seems to be called Night or something. Yu Sanjing turned to look at Nye Tian and couldn't help but frown when he saw the latter's surprised expression. You two know each other? We're friends. Nye Tian nodded and asked, is there another person called Ling Shuang Wuchen by Devil's Night's side? Yes. Yu Sanjing nodded and said, Devil's Night seems to have addressed that person as sect master or something. They stayed here for a day before leaving and haven't been seen since. It really is them. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He was very sure that Yu Sanjing was talking about Devil's Night, Ling Shuang Wuchen, and the others. It seemed that Devil's Night, Ling Shuang Wuchen, and the others had encountered the same situation as them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone to Gaoyu village. Devil's Night and the others only stayed in Gaoyu village for a day, so they probably didn't have the patience to wait for a visit. However, he didn't know what happened to Devil's Night and the others since there was no news of them until now. Nye Tian, if you're friends with Devil's Night, then you have to be careful. At this time, the group arrived at the entrance of Gaoyu village. Yu Sanjing smiled and looked at Nye Tian. Although Devil's Night only stayed here for a day, he has offended many people. Sir Yu, what's going on? Nye Tian couldn't help but ask with a frown. Yu Sanjing shook his head and smiled bitterly. Devil's Night was disrespectful to the Feng Tian immortal and angered many young people in the village. He even fought with some of them. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. So that's what happened. Devil's Night had always been arrogant, and he relied on his identity as the Beacon Emperor. It would be difficult for him to address himself as Lord Immortal Venerable. Moreover, the people here revered the Feng Tian Immortal as if he were a god, so it was normal for there to be friction. Nye Tian reckoned that Devil's Night must have taught those people a harsh lesson. If you meet those youngsters who fought with Devil's Night, it's best if you don't speak too much. Yu Sanjing looked at Nye Tian, very worried that what had happened to Devil's Night would repeat itself on Nye Tian. Yes. Nye Tian nodded and did not say anything else. After entering the village, Nye Tian arrived at Yu Sanjing's house. Father, you're back. The one who came out to welcome them was Yu Sanjing's son. As if he already knew what Yu Sanjing was going to do, he wasn't surprised at the arrival of Nye Tian and the others. This is my son, Yu Chao. Yu Sanjing nodded and introduced enthusiastically. Please take a seat in the house. Yu Chao welcomed Nye Tian and the others into the house, looking very happy. Nye Tian looked around. It was a clean and spacious courtyard house, decorated simply and clean, a typical village house. Looks like they're all ordinary people. Nye Tian thought to himself as he randomly found a stool and sat down. He had been observing in the dark, but did not sense any energy fluctuations from Yu Sanjing and Yu Chao. He guessed that the people of this world did not practice martial arts. Of course, those so-called immortal cultivators were excluded. Grandfather. At this moment, a clear voice sounded, and a delicate figure walked into the house. It was the young girl who followed Yu Sanjing yesterday. The young girl was about 17 or 18 years old. Her facial features were not exquisite, but they were regular, giving off a very pure feeling. "This is my granddaughter, Yu Yu Sanjing introduced as he gestured for Yu to sit down. Yu sat beside Yu Sanjing, looking at Nie Tian and the others curiously, as if she had seen something rare. Nie Tian furrowed his brows, feeling a little uneasy. Although Yu Sanjing's family was very hospitable, he felt that there was more to it than meets the eye. Especially Yu Chao and Yu Er's indescribable respect towards Nie Tian and the others, it made him feel even more uneasy. Nie Tian glanced at Qing Qi. Although the latter was smiling, he could see that he was a little unnatural, as if he had sensed something. "Old brother, we're from out of town, thank you for your warm hospitality." Qing Qi did not expose him, but smiled and said politely, "Mr. Qing Qi, you went to the Fengtian sect yesterday, but you were stopped at the door, right?" Yu Sanjing smiled and said straightforwardly. Qing Qi nodded and smiled bitterly. "We couldn't break the formation of the Fengtian sect's mountain gate. Fortunately, you couldn't break it. If you did, you'd be in trouble." Yu Sanjing took a sip of tea and smiled. "The Fengtian sect is very strict. If you broke their mountain gate, you'd be in big trouble." Qing Qi took a glance at Nie Tian, but didn't say anything. "Mr. Yu, we have an important matter to visit the Fengtian sect. Can you help us get an invitation?" Nie Tian did not stand on ceremony and asked directly. "An invitation is fine, but it'll take some time." Yu Sanjing replied with a smile. "We don't have much time. Please think of a way to get an invitation as soon as possible, Mr. Yu." Nie Tian was afraid that Yu Sanjing would say that, so he quickly said, I'm afraid it'll be a little difficult." Yu Sanjing had an awkward expression on his face, looking like he was at his wit's end. "You may not know the Fengtian sect." Yu Chao stepped forward and was about to explain but was interrupted by Nie Tian. "We know it's hard to get an invitation, but we really don't have much time." Nie Tian pursed his lips and glanced at Yu Chao. He did not try to hide anything and said directly, "If you can help us, we'll be very grateful. If you have any difficulties, we can help too." Saying it so bluntly was almost like they were making a deal. Ahem, ahem. Yu Sanjing could not help but cough when he heard Nie Tian's words. Although they hid it well, Nie Tian still saw through it. "Mr. Qing Qi, you're not foreigners, but people from another world, am I right?" Yu Sanjing did not hide it anymore and asked Qing Qi. "Yes." Qing Qi was stunned at first, then nodded. He did not expect Yu Sanjing to be able to see through it. "Your world advocates martial arts. You're all martial artists, am I right?" Yu Sanjing's eyes quivered. He looked very happy and asked cautiously. Qing Qi and Nie Tian looked at each other and nodded again. Sure enough, this old man really did have something to ask of them. Then it'll be easy. Yu Sanjing was even more excited when he saw Qing Qi nod. Then, he became a bit embarrassed and said, "The people of our world don't practice martial arts and don't know what it is. But we do have cultivators here, such as those from the Fengtian sect." It's said that the Fengtian sect's immortal cultivation methods were passed down from a great man a long time ago. That great man came from your world and was an ancient saint venerable. Ancient saint venerable! Nie Tian and Qing Qi exclaimed at the same time when they heard the name. Chapter 45-72. When Nie Tian heard Yu Sanjing say that the Fengtian sect's cultivation method originated from an ancient saint sovereign, he couldn't help but be shocked. Ancient saint sovereigns were the 9 strongest sages among the first batch of human sages during the ancient times. Ancient saint sovereigns were a special title that represented the strongest existence among humans during the ancient times. The true founder of the Fengtian sect wasn't the first Beacon Emperor, but the ancient saint sovereign who had fallen in the Sky Beacon mountain range. The world Nie Tian and the others had entered was the Fengtian sect's 9 extreme gates. One could boldly speculate that the ancient saint sovereign mentioned by Yu Sanjing was most likely the same ancient saint sovereign who had fallen in the Sky Phoenix sect. The chances of two ancient saint sovereigns appearing in the same place were too low. That's right. Yu Sanjing was taken aback. He didn't know why Nie Tian and Qing Qi were so surprised. He continued, "Some people say that there used to be no people on the immortal Qi continent. It was the ancient Holy Venerate who came to this continent and gave birth to his descendant. That's how the immortal Qi continent became prosperous. It's no exaggeration to say that the ancient saint sovereign was the one who created the immortal Qi continent." Upon hearing Yu Sanjing's words, Nie Tian and Qing Qi were once again dumbfounded and speechless. If what Yu Sanjing said was true, then the people on the immortal Qi continent were the descendants of the ancient saint sovereign. "Duke Yu, do you know how big the immortal Qi continent is?" Qing Qi asked curiously after calming down a little. They had come from the Fengtian sect, but that didn't mean the continent was small. It was likely that the Fengtian sect's 9 extreme gates was only one of the thousands of entrances to the immortal Qi continent. "I don't know." Yu Sanjing shook his head and smiled. "This old man has lived for more than 90 years, but I've never left Phoenix Morning Mountain." Nie Tian frowned. Yu Sanjing didn't look like an old man in his 90s, but more like a man in his 50s or 60s. Although the All-Heaven Saints' world-revered strength, cultivators did not make up a large proportion of the population. It was only around a tenth at most. The remaining 9 out of 10 were ordinary people who did not cultivate martial arts. Their lifespans were between a few decades to 100 years old. Nie Tian originally thought that Yu Sanjing was an ordinary person in his 50s or 60s. He didn't expect the latter to be in his 90s. However, the scenery here was picturesque, so it was normal for the people who lived here to live longer. However, when I was young, I visited the Fengtian sect once and was fortunate enough to hear the Fengtian immortal preach. According to the immortal sovereign, our immortal Qi continent is vast and boundless, without end. No one has ever reached the border of the immortal Qi continent. Yu Sanjing looked at Qing Qi as if recalling the past. A fiery light surged in his eyes. Not long ago, he had once been hot-blooded and dreamed of becoming an immortal cultivator. However, because his fate in immortality was too shallow, he was rejected by the Fengtian sect in the end. "Sir Yu, how long do the cultivators of the Fengtian sect live?" Qing Qi frowned and asked with a smile. He had a vague guess in his mind. According to Yu Sanjing, the immortal Qi continent was a world of cultivation. The people of the immortal Qi continent were likely descendants of the ancient sacred sovereign, and the cultivation methods they cultivated were also passed down from the ancient sacred sovereign. All of this was very similar to the development of martial Tao in the sacred world. The martial Tao system of the sacred world had also been established in primeval times by the first batch of ancient sacred sovereigns. For example, the spirit realm, god realm, and sage realm weren't innate existences. Instead, the first batch of cultivators had discussed the characteristics of their martial Tao before finally deciding on them. Later on, cultivators would cultivate along this martial Tao system, resulting in the current world of martial Tao. Just like in the world Nie Tian had come from, all cultivators strictly followed the 9 realms of origin meridians, origin spirits, then diviners, and then celestial emperors. But after coming to the sacred world, the people here only called the spirit realm the basic realm. The god realm was just a stage to expand one's strength, and the sage realm was the true beginning of martial Tao. Therefore, people in different worlds, different understandings, and different systems would lead to different achievements. Take Nie Tian for example. If he hadn't left the sacred world, he would have remained a peak celestial emperor for the rest of his life. Qing Qi felt that martial Tao and immortal Tao were 2 different cultivation systems that had existed since primeval times. In the end, martial Tao prevailed in the sacred world, while immortal Tao was developed in the immortal Qi continent. The era of the ancient sacred sovereign had been a crucial period for the establishment of cultivation systems, so it wasn't strange for there to be many different cultivation systems at the same time. Qingqi really wanted to know how long the cultivators here had lived. The strength of a cultivation system was often directly proportional to one's lifespan. The longer one lived, the stronger one's cultivation system would be, and vice versa. At the end of the day, cultivation was to improve one's body. The stronger one's body was, the longer one's lifespan would be. Yu Sanjing was taken aback at first, as if he hadn't expected Qingqi to ask such a question. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "I don't know much about immortals. But I've heard that some powerful immortals can live for hundreds of years, and some can even live up to 1,000. 100 years, 1,000 years." Qingqi murmured with a smile. He understood many things now. Perhaps many cultivation systems existed in the all-heaven sacred world in the primordial era, but in the end, the system of martial arts with an absolute advantage emerged victorious. It lasted until now, becoming the current all-heaven sacred world. In Qingqi's opinion, the martial Dao system's popularity was directly related to its ability to extend a cultivator's lifespan. After all, most people wanted to live longer when they first started cultivating. The most obvious advantage of the martial Dao system over the immortal Dao system was the cultivator's lifespan. The immortal Dao system could at most extend a person's lifespan to 1,000 years, which was too little. Even if Yu Sanjing wasn't right, it was at most a few thousand years. 10,000 years was the limit. In the martial Dao system, cultivators at the basic realm could live up to 1,000 years, and those at the God realm could live up to 10,000 years. It was normal for Sage realm cultivators to live up to a few 100,000 years, and some old monsters could even live up to a few million years. But even so, the martial Dao system wasn't free from the limitations of lifespan. Even the most powerful sacred ancestor had a limit to their lifespan. Although the martial Dao system was much stronger than the immortal Dao system in terms of lifespan, it didn't mean that cultivators were weaker than cultivators. There must be something special about the immortal Dao system for it to be spread and respected in the immortal Qi continent. Otherwise, the ancient sacred venerate wouldn't have needed to promote the immortal Dao system in the immortal Qi continent. He could have just used the martial Dao system. "Mr. Qingqi, you look like an immortal. You must be quite old." Yu Sanjing looked at Qingqi and smiled. "In my opinion, you should be around the same age as those immortals. You should be a few 100 years old, right?" Qingqi nodded with a smile, declining to comment. So you're here." At that moment, a bright voice rang out. Then, a strong figure dashed in. In the face of the intruder, Nie Tian narrowed his eyes slightly, and his expression changed involuntarily. He sensed a wave of power from the newcomer. It was a power that he'd never come into contact with before. Chapter 45-73. Nie Tian's expression changed when he saw the young man who had suddenly barged in. He sensed a mysterious power from the former that he had never encountered before. A cultivator. Qingqi's expression also changed at the same time, and he almost cried out. However, the young man did not notice the presence of Nie Tian and Qingqi at all. His eyes were bright and passionate as he stared straight at Yu Lu. He seemed to be very happy. Yu Lu looked at the man in front of her and was also very happy, but she did not show it. She only smiled shyly and nodded. "Gao Yan, you've come at the right time. Let me introduce you to a few new friends." Yu Sanjing smiled, stood up, and introduced Nie Tian and the others one by one. Gao Yan finally noticed Nie Tian and the others. He nodded at them one by one, but he did not show much interest. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Although Gao Yan was very polite on the surface, he could feel that the latter was an extremely arrogant person. His eyes, especially, always gave off a feeling of superiority. "Sir Yu, I can see that Brother Gao Yan has an extraordinary temperament. Could he be a cultivator?" The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said with a smile. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect little brother Nye Tian to have such good eyesight. You can actually tell that Gao Yen is a cultivator at a glance. Yu Sanjing laughed heartily and seemed very proud. He said, Our Gaoyu village has 3 people who entered the Fengtian sect, and Gao Yen is one of them. So you're a cultivator from the Fengtian sect. My apologies. Nye Tian smiled and nodded at Gao Yen again. You're not from here? Gao Yen seemed even more arrogant. He glanced at Nye Tian and the others and asked. When his gaze fell on Mo Rushi, he paused for a moment, but then looked away. It was obvious that he was a little surprised by Mo Rushi's appearance, but he did not dare to show it too obviously because he was a cultivator. Exactly. Nye Tian nodded and saw the scene of Gao Yen looking at Mo Rushi. He felt a little disgusted, but he didn't flare up. Instead, he said, To tell you the truth, we have something to visit the Fengtian sect. May I ask Brother Gao Yen to introduce us? Why, do you also want to join the Fengtian sect? Gao Yen smiled, his eyes filled with contempt. He had seen many people like Nye Tian. They were nothing more than idiots who dreamed of becoming immortals. How could they know that the path of cultivation was not something mortals could hope for? There were more than 10 million people in the world who wanted to cultivate, but those who could step onto the path of immortality were few and far between. Immortal cultivation not only required immortal roots, talent, and determination, but most importantly, immortal affinity. Without the immortal fate, even if you are a heaven-defying genius, you can only be immortal. The Fengtian sect was one of the 4 major immortal sects of the Xian Qi continent. Its sect master, the Fengtian Immortal, was even revered as the Lord of Immortality. The Fengtian sect opened the opportunity of immortal affinity once every 10 years. Millions of people flocked to it, but only a few dozen could enter the sect in the end. Gaoyu village had a small population, but every time the opportunity opened, people could enter the Fengtian sect. This was not because the young people in Gaoyu village had good immortal roots, but because they were located on Fengming Mountain, so the Fengtian sect took great care of them. To Gao Yen, being born in Gaoyu village was his immortal affinity. Nye Tian and a few outsiders also wanted to enter the Fengtian sect. It was simply a fool's dream. Brother Gao, you misunderstood us. We are just visiting. We have no intention of joining the Fengtian sect. Nye Tian could naturally see the contempt in Gao Yan's eyes, but he didn't say anything and only responded indifferently. Oh! Gao Yan frowned, feeling that he was being looked down upon. His face darkened and he said in a cold tone, Then may I ask, why do you want to visit the Fengtian sect? Nye Tian heard the sarcasm in Gao Yan's tone and said with a smile, It's a personal matter. It's not convenient to disclose. Gao Yan raised his eyebrows and said in a cold tone, Then I'm sorry, but other than the people of the Fengtian sect, outsiders who want to enter must apply for a visitation card. Then can Brother Gao help us apply for a visitation card? Nye Tian's brows furrowed as he felt a stifling feeling in his heart. You and I are not related. Why should I apply for a visitation card for you? Gao Yan smiled cold and looked at Nye Tian as if he was watching a joke. Nye Tian's face darkened and he didn't say anything else. Yu Sanjing, who was at the side, had an awkward expression and quickly said, Gao Yan, Brother Nye Tian is a martial cultivator. Maybe you can be friends. Martial cultivator? Gao Yan frowned. Only now did he realize that Nye Tian's appearance gave him a sense of déjà vu. His eyes couldn't help but tremble and he seemed to be a little afraid. He then sneered and said, Is he the same as Devil's Knight? After Yu Sanjing's reminder, Gao Yan realized that Nye Tian was somewhat similar to Devil's Knight who came to Gaoyu village not long ago. Judging from their age, they seemed to be brothers. Gao Yan didn't know that there were martial cultivators in this world other than immortal cultivators. He only knew what kind of people martial cultivators were after coming into contact with Devil's Knight. Moreover, martial cultivators gave him a great shock, especially the strength that Devil's Knight displayed, which far exceeded his expectations. Devil's Knight is my friend. Nie Tian didn't have any scruples and said directly. Friend? Gao Yan's face immediately darkened, and a strange aura surged out from his body. He said cold, then I'd like to see how you compare to your friend. Gao Yan, what are you doing? Seeing this, Yu Sanjing's face immediately darkened, and he immediately shouted in a low voice. He didn't want to see Nie Tian and Gao Yan fight. Didn't Sir Yu ask me to be friends with him? Gao Yan didn't stop. He stared at Nie Tian and said cold, in your place, this is called making friends through martial arts, isn't it? Since Brother Gao is interested, Nie Tian wouldn't dare to spoil the mood. Nie Tian stood up with a smile on his lips. He spoke calmly, and his aura slowly rose, steadily suppressing Gao Yan. Third realm. Gao Yan felt the pressure from the void and couldn't help but take a few steps back. He couldn't help but exclaim. Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't quite understand what Gao Yan meant by third realm. Do you dare to fight with me in the courtyard? Gao Yan steadied his body and asked coldly without any hint of fear. I'll fight you to the end. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He moved and arrived in the courtyard like a ray of light. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression changed. He felt strange. He felt that the structure of time here was different from the All Saints world. Vaguely, there seemed to be a force in the void that made him feel a sense of suppression. In fact, he already had this feeling when he faced the Fengtian sect's Mountain Gate formation yesterday, but he wasn't too sure. At this moment, he was truly sure that the structure of time in this world was indeed different. Perhaps this was why the people of the Divine Qi continent cultivated immortality instead of martial art. Come. At the same time, Gao Yan arrived at the courtyard and let out a grunt. His aura exploded and a mystical force was emitted, which transformed into a giant glowing figure outside of his body. It was solemn and holy, and emitted a powerful pressure. Chapter 45-74. Nie Tian felt his aura stagnate and his expression changed slightly. On the other hand, Gao Yan's aura surged unceasingly. His profound power flowed smoothly like floating clouds and flowing water, without the slightest pause. The dignified light projection around him was so vast and holy that Nie Tian felt a strong pressure from it. What are you two doing? Don't hurt each other. Yu Sanjing's face paled at the sight of the two, and he quickly shouted. Qing Qi didn't have much of a reaction. He merely observed Gao Yan curiously in an attempt to find the source of his power and how he regulated his breathing. He wasn't worried about Nie Tian. Though he had no understanding of the immortal Tao, he believed in Nie Tian's strength. Art of the Breeze, 10,000 elephants' palm. However, Gao Yan didn't pay the slightest attention to Yu Sanjing. With a bellow, he pressed his palm down, and the glowing shadow around him launched a powerful attack towards Nie Tian with mountain-crushing momentum. Bang! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he unleashed his sword Qi, which pierced through the air and shattered the palm projection with a muffled sound. Gao Yan's expression changed as he exclaimed in surprise. He attacked again, this time with a horizontal slap. His eyes were vicious. Nie Tian, however, remained where he was. The sword Qi around him howled like a storm and broke through the attack in the air. This time, Gao Yan's body shook under the pressure of the sword Qi. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. Gao Yan steadied himself. He was both shocked and angry. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so strong. What about me? Nie Tian's lips twitched, his face was full of mockery. Gao Yan had always been arrogant because of his identity as an immortal cultivator. Nie Tian had long since grown tired of him. Since Gao Yan asked for a friendly duel, Nie Tian could use this opportunity to teach him a lesson. You've angered me. Gao Yan's eyes sank and surged with killing intent that was difficult to conceal. If it was said that he just wanted to suppress Nie Tian and vent his anger, then now, he had already made up his mind to kill Nie Tian. Angered just like that? It seems that I have overestimated the temperament of immortal cultivators. Nie Tian could naturally sense the other party's killing intent, but he smiled faintly and didn't care in the slightest. In the eyes of an ordinary person like Yu Sanjing, cultivators were the kind of sage-like grandmasters who stood aloof from worldly affairs. But it was a pity that once they lost face, these immortal cultivators would be flustered and exasperated, no different from ordinary people. You're courting death. Gao Yen didn't think that Nie Tian would dare to mock him. He was instantly enraged. With a low roar, he took a step forward, creating a deep pit in the hard ground. After that, he moved his palms and a powerful force surged out, condensing into a whirlpool between his palms. The atmosphere was incomparably mysterious. Seeing this, Qing Qi's pupils shrunk and he was overjoyed. Though he only sensed it for a moment, he was certain that Gao Yan's energy came from his lower dantian. In martial arts, the lower dantian is also the place where cultivators awaken their yuan meridians. Judging from the source of energy, there wasn't much difference between immortal cultivators and martial cultivators. Just then, Gao Yan's eyes darkened. Suddenly, he slammed his palm forward. The whirlpool shot out like an arrow and headed straight for Nie Tian. The corner of Nie Tian's lips twitched. Unhurriedly, the sword in his palm surged and transformed into a giant whirlpool. It forcefully absorbed the whirlpool, as if swallowing it whole, and merged it with his sword. How is this possible? Gao Yan's face changed color at this scene and he couldn't help but scream. Nie Tian had directly absorbed his energy. What was going on? He had been cultivating for many years and has never encountered something like this. This was far too strange and beyond his understanding of the immortal path. Nie Tian forcefully absorbed the whirlpool. His eyes narrowed as if he was sensing something. Spurt. A while later, Nie Tian actually opened his mouth slightly and spat out the whirlpool like he was spitting phlegm. You! Gao Yan's face flushed with anger when he saw this. He felt that Nie Tian was humiliating him like this. Nie Tian smiled and said, "Brother Gao, your energy is truly extraordinary. I really can't absorb it." Gao Yan's face darkened and he said nothing. The reason why Nie Tian had forcibly absorbed the cyclone just now was because he wanted to personally experience what kind of power the so-called celestial force was. What surprised him was that immortal energy seemed to have an element as well, but it was different from the 9 energies of the sacred world. It was more like a refined form of the 9 energies. He was very curious as to whether this immortal energy was directly absorbed by cultivators from the outside world or converted from other energies. "Let's stop here," Yu Sanjing said with a smile. Seeing that Nie Tian and Gao Yan had stopped fighting, Yu Sanjing was very happy and stepped forward with a smile. Nie Tian nodded slightly, but he had many questions in his mind. When he'd fought just now, he'd clearly sensed a strange power in the space here that greatly suppressed his strength. The strength of the space here was also far stronger than in the sacred world. In fact, it was several times stronger than the space in the peak sacred world. As a result, although the battle between Nie Tian and Gao Yan seemed very casual, their strength was not weak at all. In terms of martial cultivation, Nie Tian speculated that Gao Yan should be equivalent to a heavenly tribulation sage ruler or even a heavenly perception sage emperor. Moreover, Gao Yan's mention of the third realm piqued Nie Tian's curiosity. Was the division of cultivation realms really that simple? Were they just named realms 1, 2, and 3? Although Gao Yan was unwilling, he was no fool. He already knew that he was no match for Nie Tian, so he could only give up. Everyone once again returned to the hall of the central room. The atmosphere was a little strange, and it was very different from before. "Brother Gao, what did you mean by third realm?" After a moment of silence, Nie Tian was the first to break the silence with a faint smile. He knew that he might have to rely on Gao Yan if he wanted to quickly visit the Feng Tian sect, so he didn't want their relationship to be too strained. "Why should I tell you?" Gao Yin clearly didn't want to reconcile with Nie Tian and responded with a sneer. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but smile and asked, "I'm guessing that it's the realm of cultivators? So what if it is?" Gao Yan's tone was still cold, as if he didn't want to pay any attention to Nie Tian. However, Nie Tian was not embarrassed. He smiled faintly and briefly explained the division of martial realms before asking, "Brother Gao, I'd like to know what the division of cultivation realms is like. Please tell me." Gao Yan's expression was gloomy, but he listened carefully to Nie Tian's explanation of the division of martial realms. His expression softened a little, and he said, "The division of cultivation realms isn't as complicated as the division of martial realms. There are only 6 realms, from lowest to highest, the first realm to the 6th realm." Nie Tian frowned and the corner of his mouth twitched. He really didn't expect the division of cultivation realms to be so simple. Chapter 45-75. Nie Tian couldn't help but laugh at the division of realms from the first realm to the 6th realm. Such a simple and direct naming method was beyond anyone's expectations. Supreme Celestial Sovereign said that the cultivation of the body and the mind are the same. 6 realms are enough, there's no need to make it so complicated, Gao Yin said indifferently, seeing what Nie Tian was thinking. That's true. Nie Tian nodded with a smile. He didn't know who the Supreme Celestial Sovereign was, so he didn't ask. He smiled and said, "Brother Gao, may I ask what realm you are at now?" "The 2nd realm." Gao Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately showed a proud expression. "The 2nd realm?" Nie Tian couldn't help but be shocked when he heard Gao Yan's answer. Gao Yin saw Nie Tian's reaction and thought that the latter was looking down on his low realm. His face couldn't help but darken. "You don't know, Gao Yin is not even 20 years old, but he has already reached the 2nd realm. This is extremely rare in the entire Fengtian sect." Yu Sanjing also thought that Nie Tian was looking down on Gao Yin and quickly explained. "So Gao Yin is a genius of the immortal Tao. He is indeed a heroic youth." Qing Qi was also stunned for a moment before he reacted and nodded. Yu Sanjing and the others didn't know that Nie Tian and the others didn't mean to look down on Gao Yin at all, but was purely shocked. Qing Qi had long seen that in the battle between Gao Yin and Nie Tian, Gao Yin was far weaker than Nie Tian, but his strength was also extremely shocking. In terms of martial arts cultivation, Gao Yin should be about the same as a tribulation sage. However, Gao Yan's strength was only at the 2nd realm. This was somewhat unbelievable. If the 2nd realm was equivalent to a tribulation sage, then wouldn't a cultivator at the 6th realm be far stronger than a sky martial saint? Could it be that cultivators of the immortal Tao were much stronger than cultivators of the martial Tao? After a moment, Nie Tian became cold and asked Gao Yin, "Brother Gao, how long have you been in the immortal Tao?" "I entered the Fengtian sect at the age of 6. It has been 13 years since then." Gao Yin could tell that Nie Tian was really curious, so he put away his arrogant attitude and asked, "How long have you been practicing martial arts?" "About 100 years. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and nodded. If his age in this life was less than 100 years old, but if his previous life was counted, it would be a few hundred years. Nie Tian knew that if he didn't have the accumulation from his previous life, he wouldn't have been able to advance so quickly in this life, so he said 100 years. 100 years. Who knew that when Gao Yin and the others heard Nie Tian's words, they all exclaimed in shock, looking at Nie Tian in disbelief. Nie Tian knew what they were thinking, but he just smiled and didn't explain anything. Nie Tian, so you're already over 100 years old?" After a long time, Yu Sanjing was the first to react. He seemed to be too excited and asked with a trembling voice. "Yes." Nie Tian nodded with a smile. "How is that possible?" Yu Lu couldn't help but ask in surprise. "Then why are you so young?" "Young?" Nie Tian's lips twitched and he said with a faint smile, "In my world, many people who cultivate martial arts are much older than me, and they have always been very young. For those who cultivate martial arts, the higher their cultivation, the longer their lifespan, and the slower their aging speed. Many people who were tens of thousands of years old were no different from a 20-year-old young man. However, no matter how high their cultivation was, they would still slowly age. Even if they could maintain their appearance, their martial body would deteriorate. This. Gao Yan and the others looked at each other. They couldn't accept Nie Tian's words at all. In the world of immortals, even a level 6 celestial venerable would age very quickly. Even if they could live up to 1,000 years old, after 100 years they would look like old people. For a person who was over 100 years old like Nie Tian to look like a 20-year-old young man, it was too unbelievable. Then how old are you? At this time, Gao Yan suddenly looked at Qing Qi with his eyes wide open, and asked bluntly. Qing Qi smiled and did not say anything. Instead, he raised a finger. 100 years old? No, it should be 1,000 years old. Gao Yan's eyes narrowed. He first said 100 years old, but immediately felt that it was wrong and corrected himself. But Qing Qi shook his head. 10,000 years old? Gao Yan was startled again. Yu Sanjing, Yu Luer, and the others also looked at Qing Qi as if they were looking at a monster. Qing Qi shook his head again. This. Gao Yan's expression changed, and he gulped. Could it be 100,000 years old? 1,000,000 years old. Qing Qi smiled and nodded. 1,000,000 years old. Gao Yan was shocked, and he let out a strange cry. He was stunned as if he was struck by lightning. How could he imagine that there was someone who had lived for 1,000,000 years in this world? This was even more than an celestial venerable. The others were also stunned. The scene was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. In fact, Qing Qi was a little conservative. His real age was much older. After a long time, Gao Yan finally regained his senses and asked Nie Tian solemnly, "Do all the cultivators in the world of martial arts have such a long life?" "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and said with a smile, "Basically, cultivators who have reached the sage realm have a lifespan of more than 100,000 years. This." Gao Yan gasped, his face blank. Such a long life was far beyond his understanding, and it completely subverted his worldview. It was not an exaggeration to say that if he was given another chance to choose between the immortal Tao and the martial Tao, he would definitely choose the martial Tao. "Brother Gao, I'm very curious. What realm is the exalted celestial venerable of the Fengtian sect at?" Nie Tian smiled faintly, and when Gao Yan recovered a little, he asked. "The 5th realm." Gao Yan was very straightforward and said directly. "The 5th realm." Nie Tian was taken aback and his brows furrowed. Judging from Yu Sanjing's words, the Fengtian sect should be the pinnacle immortal Tao power of the immortal Qi continent. How could its sect master only have a cultivation of the 5th stage? The realms of the immortal Tao are divided into the 1st to the 6th realm, and each realm is further divided into the 3 ranks of heaven, earth, and human. Furthermore, each realm has a specific name. Gao Yan calmed down and said, "The 1st realm is an immortal, the 2nd realm is an immortal master, and the 3rd realm is an immortal. Those in the 3rd stage are grand immortal masters, those in the 4th stage are immortal monarchs, those in the 5th stage are immortal venerables, and those in the 6th stage are great venerables or high venerables. As far as I know, there are less than 1,000 immortal venerables in the immortal Qi continent, and most of them are human venerables. There are less than 100 earth venerables, and as for heaven venerables there are less than 5. What about the 6th stage great immortal venerables?" Nie Tian's eyes darkened and he could not help but ask. "Probably not." Gao Yan shook his head and revealed a bitter smile. In the history of the immortal Qi continent, there are only about 10 great immortal venerables that can be verified. All of those people were existences that shocked the past and present, and their names will forever be engraved in the history of the immortal Tao. They were revered by tens of thousands of people. As he spoke, Gao Yan's eyes revealed a blazing light. Yearning and Longing. Chapter 4576. Nie Tian couldn't help but frown at Gao Yan's words. He hadn't expected immortal cultivation to be so difficult. In the long history of the divine Qi continent, only a handful of great celestial venerables had reached level 6. Compared to martial arts, immortal cultivation was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. In martial arts, those who could reach the sky martial realm were few and far between, but not to the extent that they were few and far between. There were many sky martial realm experts in the all-heavens sacred world, but those who could reach level 9 of the sky martial realm were few and far between. Nie Tian, do you really want to visit the Feng Tian sect? After a while, Gao Yin calmed down and asked Nie Tian. Yes. Nie Tian's eyes lit up as he nodded vigorously, knowing that he had a good chance of winning. 3 days later, my master will come to Gaoyu village. At that time, I will introduce you to him. You can ask him. Maybe there is hope. Perhaps there's hope if you ask him. Thank you, Brother Gao. Nie Tian was overjoyed and immediately stood up to express his thanks. Gao Yin nodded and looked at Yu Sanjing with a dark expression. Sir Yu, you want Nie Tian to represent Gaoyu village, right? Yu Sanjing was taken aback at first, then he smiled awkwardly and nodded. Nie Tian was taken aback as well. Only now did he realize that Yu Sanjing wanted him to do this for him. Sir Yu, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but the agreement between Gaoyu village and Fang village should be resolved by the two villages. Outsiders shouldn't interfere. Gao Yin frowned and glanced at Nie Tian. Nie Tian isn't from Gaoyu village. He's not even from the divine Qi continent. If we let him fight, even if we win against Fang village, we'll become a laughingstock. This. Yu Sanjing's expression darkened. Gao Yin, Gaoyu village has lost 3 years in a row. If we keep losing, I'm afraid the villagers won't be able to hold on. Gao Yin sighed, then said excitedly, Don't worry, Sir Yu. I'll definitely win for Gaoyu village this time. Gao Yin, our Gaoyu village has been weak for a long time. The number of immortal cultivators is far less than that of Fang village. No matter how strong you are, you can only win 1 round. Yu Sanjing shook his head and said, To tell you the truth, I passed by Fang village not long ago and heard that Fang Yang's cultivation has already reached the 3rd realm. There's also Fang Wu, Fang Ren, and Fang Yuan. They're all 2nd realm immortal masters and aren't any weaker than you. Look at our Gaoyu village. Apart from you, only Yu Dong has some strength. The others don't have any battle power. Under such circumstances, if we don't bring in reinforcements, we'll definitely lose. With that, Yu Sanjing sighed and lowered his head. According to my knowledge, Fang Yong had just attained the 2nd stage of the heaven rank a few months ago. How could he have broken through to the 3rd stage in such a short period of time? Gao Yan's expression changed, and he was extremely shocked. He knew Fang Yong, who was also a cultivator of the Feng Tian sect. Although they didn't have the same master, they could be considered as fellow disciples. He couldn't believe that Fang Yong was able to break through to the 3rd realm in just a few months. Sir Yu, what's going on? Qing Qi had more or less guessed what was going on after listening to their conversation, but he still asked. Yu Sanjing sighed once more, and only then did he tirelessly explain the whole story. It turned out that Gaoyu village and the neighboring Fang village had always been on bad terms. The main source of their conflict was a canal between the two villages. The two villages were very close to the canal, and the other canals were very far away. Therefore, both villages wanted to claim the canal as their own. The dispute over the canal was very intense. In order not to cause large-scale casualties, the two villages agreed to a duel every year. Each side would send out 3 people to fight in pairs, and 2 out of 3 would win. Because Gaoyu village's talents had dwindled in recent years, it had suffered defeat for 3 years in a row. This year, it was almost time for the duel. Yu Sanjing had no choice but to turn to Nie Tian, hoping to use Nie Tian's strength to win the duel. So that's how it is. After listening to Yu Sanjing, Nie Tian couldn't help but glance at Gao Yan. I think Brother Gao is right. After all, this duel is a matter between your two villages. As an outsider, it's not appropriate for me to interfere. Nie Tian Yu Sanjing's face froze when he heard Nie Tian's excuse. He was momentarily speechless. He had no reason to insist on Nie Tian's help. Moreover, he knew that it was indeed inappropriate to ask for an outsider's help in a duel between two villages. However, I can spar with Brother Gao and learn from each other, so that Brother Gao can face the battle in a better state. Nie Tian smiled and looked at Gao Yan. Gao Yan's face reddened. Even if Nie Tian spoke tactfully, how could he not hear that Nie Tian intended to guide him? Although Nie Tian was a martial cultivator, there were many similarities between martial and immortal Dao. Moreover, Nie Tian's strength was far above Gao Yan's, so Nie Tian was indeed qualified to guide Gao Yan. Yu Sanjing's expression was ugly, but he could only nod reluctantly. Since things had come to this, it was useless to force it. They could only leave it at that for now. In the next few days, Nie Tian and Gao Yan exchanged pointers and became more familiar with each other. Gao Yan's attitude also gradually changed. After a few exchanges, he was extremely respectful of Nie Tian. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Early in the morning, Nie Tian woke up and went to find Gao Yan. Gao Yan said that his master would come to Gaoyu village today, and he could introduce him to Nie Tian. As soon as he arrived at Gao Yan's house, Nie Tian heard the sound of an intense quarrel. Nie Tian frowned and walked quickly to the Gao family's courtyard. He saw a middle-aged man in gray and a few young men in green. They seemed to be arguing with Gao Yan about something. Immortal cultivators. Nie Tian's heart sank when he saw these people and faintly sensed the surging aura of immortal power. After spending a few days with Gao Yan, he had become quite familiar with immortal power and found a way to sense it. At this moment, he sensed that the young men had surging immortal power around them. Their auras were not inferior to Gao Yan's. As for the middle-aged man in gray, his aura was even stronger, far stronger than Gao Yan's. If Gao Yan's immortal power was a stream, then the middle-aged man's immortal power was a river. This middle-aged man is at least a third realm grand immortal master. He might even be a fourth realm immortal lord. Nie Tian thought to himself as he walked into the courtyard. Gao Yan, hurry and call your brother out. Our master wants to test his immortal foundation. Come, Master Liang, I have already told you that my master will be in charge of my brother's immortal foundation test. Why do you have to interfere? Master Liang, I have already told you that my master will be in charge of my younger brother's immortal foundation test. Why do you have to interfere? Although his tone was respectful, the anger in his eyes could not be suppressed. Although his tone was still respectful, the anger in his eyes was somewhat uncontrollable. Your master and I are good friends. What difference does it make who will take the immortal foundation test? The middle-aged man called Master Liang's expression darkened. As he spoke, he released a vigorous pressure that turned into an invisible hand that pressed towards Gao Yan. Chapter 45-77. Boom! As the gray-robed middle-aged man, Liang Zhao, spoke, he released an invisible pressure that pressed down on Gao Yan. Before Gao Yan could react, he felt his chest being locked down by a terrifying force. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Since you're not saying anything, it means you have no objections. Liang Zhao smiled, then waved his hand and said to the young man behind him, Fang Ren, go get Gao Yan's younger brother. Yes, master. Fang Ren nodded and smiled, the corners of his mouth curling into a cold smile. Wait a minute. But before Fang Ren could take a step, a voice was heard and a figure slowly walked over. Nie Tian. Gao Yan's eyes lit up when he saw Nie Tian, and he exclaimed in surprise. Sir, Since Gao Yan doesn't want you to do the immortal foundation test for his younger brother, why do you have to force him? Nie Tian smiled faintly and walked step by step towards Gao Yan. The sword intent around his body was activated, and he forcefully broke down Liang Zhao's pressure. Gao Yan immediately recovered and panted heavily. He looked angrily at Liang Zhao and said, "Master Liang, you are an immortal monarch of the Fengtian sect. How dare you threaten a junior like me? How despicable!" Liang Zhao was actually Gao Yan's martial uncle, and Gao Yan usually respected him. Liang Zhao didn't expect Liang Zhao to be so domineering, without the slightest bit of calmness that a cultivator should have. "Who are you?" Liang Zhao, however, didn't pay any attention to Gao Yan's anger. He stared coldly at Nie Tian with a pair of incomparably sinister eyes. He was surprised that Nie Tian could easily break through his pressure, but he couldn't sense any immortal force from Nie Tian's body. As far as he knew, to be able to release immortal force so easily without leaving a trace, one had to be at least a fifth-stage immortal supremacy. Could it be that the young man in front of him was already an immortal supremacy? But how was that possible? There were less than 1,000 immortal sovereigns on the immortal Qi continent, and every one of them was a famous powerhouse. Moreover, Liang Zhao knew that the youngest immortal reverend in the immortal Qi continent was at least 30 years old. However, the person in front of him looked very young, only about 20 years old. "I'm Gao Yan's friend." Nie Tian smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curling up into a strange arc, faintly carrying a hint of provocation. "Friend?" Liang Zhao's face darkened and he couldn't help but glance at Gao Yan. He thought, when did this guy make such a powerful friend? "Master, there's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just get him to scram." Fang Ren, who was at the side, had yet to figure out the situation. With a low grunt, he took a step forward and stretched out his palm. A vigorous force pushed towards Nie Tian. Bang! Instantly, a muffled sound came from the sky. But Nie Tian, like an old tree with its roots entrenched, did not move an inch. Fang Ren frowned and his expression changed. He then roared in a low voice, "How dare you resist? You're courting death." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly struck out his palm towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and the sword chi around him surged, but he still did not move. Bang! In the next moment, Fang Ren's palm fell, but it was as if he had hit a steel plate. A muffled sound was heard, and when he retracted his hand, his entire palm was a bloody mess, as if it had been cut countless times by a sharp blade. Even the bones of his palm were exposed. "Ah, my hand!" The intense pain and horror caused Fang Ren to scream like a pig being slaughtered. He retreated continuously, not daring to take a step closer to Nie Tian. "This is Gao Yan's house. You're the unwelcome ones, and you're the ones who should scram." Nie Tianling laughed, completely ignoring Fang Ren. His eyes were like sharp blades, staring at Liang Zhao. "Little brother, may I ask which sect are you from, and why are you interfering in the affairs of the Fengtian sect?" Liang Zhao could naturally feel the threat from Nie Tian, but he still suppressed his anger and asked cold. From the strength that Nie Tian displayed, he was at least an immortal lord, or even an immortal venerable. Liang Zhao had never heard of a young immortal venerable appearing in the divine Qi continent. He was not confident that he could defeat Nie Tian, so he could only use the Fengtian sect to pressure him. In my opinion, this is not the Fengtian sect's business, but Gao Yan's. Of course, Nie Tian understood the meaning behind Liang Zhao's words. He smiled cold and said, "Gao Yan is my friend and you're bullying him like this. Naturally, I have to intervene." Liang Zhao's eyes darkened when he heard Nie Tian's words. His face was so gloomy that it almost dripped water. He had never expected that not only was Nie Tian's strength astonishing, but his words were also so sharp. "Gao Yan, you allowed your friend to hurt a fellow disciple. What are your intentions?" At this moment, a young immortal stood out from behind Liang Zhao. His eyes were incomparably sinister as he looked at Gao Yin cold and shouted. Gao Yin was speechless and did not know what to say. He also did not expect Nie Tian to be so ruthless and cripple Fang Ren's hand. You guys are flaunting your strength in the Gao family, but have you ever cared about your fellow disciples? Nie Tian's eyes darkened. He took a step forward and said in a deep voice, Moreover, me injuring Fang Ren has nothing to do with Gao Yin. It was my own idea. If any of you are dissatisfied, feel free to challenge me. Liang Zhao's face darkened. It was indescribably ugly. The more powerful Nie Tian was, the more he could not gauge his strength, and the more fearful he became. Damn brat, you are too arrogant. However, another young immortal couldn't hold it in any longer. He growled and threw a punch. The punch was fierce and headed straight for Nie Tian's face. Nie Tian's eyes darkened. Instantly, his sword intent rose and a wave of sword energy rose, knocking his opponent away. Wretch! That person stumbled back a few steps before stabilizing himself. But in the next second, a ray of sword energy whizzed by and left a glaring sword mark on his cheek. You! That person screamed in shock. But when he sensed Nie Tian's qi, he was so frightened that he couldn't speak. When others saw this, they all gasped. They were shocked by Nie Tian's strength. They did not expect the young man before them to be so terrifying. Also, the power Nie Tian displayed was unfamiliar to them. It was like a completely different qi. It was extremely strange. Gao Yin was also stunned. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be so domineering. Nie Tian's strength also shocked him. A few days ago, he had been sparring with Nie Tian. Though he was at a disadvantage, he thought Nie Tian was only slightly stronger than him. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian was much stronger than him. He had just been hiding his strength. The disciple can't do it. As the master, are you still not going to make a move? At this time, Nie Tian suddenly looked at Liang Zhao, and his calm tone was extremely provocative, directly threatening Liang Zhao. Chapter 45-78. Nie Tian's gaze was cold as he locked onto Liang Zhao. His provocation was extremely arrogant. Liang Zhao's face darkened when he was provoked in front of so many disciples. However, his eyes were filled with hesitation. He did not expect Nie Tian to challenge him directly. This made him even more fearful. If he was not confident, Nie Tian would not dare to be so arrogant. However, the current situation had forced him to accept the challenge. Otherwise, he would not have the face to be someone else's master. You're Nie Tian, right? Liang Zhao said coldly. His aura surged and sacred light spread out, causing ripples in the void. No one dared to look at him directly. Make your move. Nie Tian did not care at all. He smiled faintly and his sword intent surged out to meet Liang Zhao head-on. Bang! The moment the two auras collided, there was a muffled sound in the void. The two figures took 3 steps back at the same time. So, this is the strength of a level 4 immortal lord. Nie Tian stabilized his figure and his lips curled up into a faint smile. The reason why he challenged Liang Zhao was not because he was arrogant. He just wanted to see how strong a immortal lord was. Liang Zhao also stabilized his figure, but he looked a little disheveled. His eyes were cold as if he was calculating something. The clash of auras just now surprised him. It seemed that Nie Tian's strength was not as strong as he had imagined. However, Nie Tian's aura shocked him. He had fought with countless swordsmen and seen many sword intents. However, it was his first time seeing someone with such a pure sword intent like Nie Tian. Moreover, the aura of Nie Tian's sword intent was completely unfamiliar, as if it did not belong to this world. Fang Ren and the others who were watching the battle were completely dumbfounded. They could not see through Nie Tian's strength. They only thought that he was about the same age and strength as them. However, it seemed that Nie Tian's strength was not inferior to their master, Liang Zhao. How could they not be shocked? Gao Yin was also dumbfounded. He looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression and could not react for a long time. He was mentally prepared, but he did not expect Nie Tian to be on par with Liang Zhao. Nie Tian, who exactly are you? Liang Zhao calmed himself down and looked at Nie Tian with a grim look in his eyes. Even if Nie Tian was not as strong as he had imagined, he was still a monster. After all, anyone who was able to step foot into the 4th stage at the age of 20 was a genius of the heavens. They would definitely be able to advance to the celestial venerable realm in the future, and even have a great chance of becoming a heaven stage celestial venerable. It was even possible for them to reach the 6th stage celestial venerable realm and create a legend. According to Liang Zhao's knowledge, there were less than 100 immortal lords under the age of 20 in the entire continent. He was a heaven-rank celestial duke, and Nie Tian was on par with him. Therefore, Nie Tian was most likely a heaven-rank celestial duke. A 20-year-old heaven-rank immortal lord was simply too terrifying. I am Gao Yan's friend. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Since he already understood the strength of an immortal lord, he did not want to push it too far. After all, he still had to visit the Fengtian sect. You! Liang Zhao knew that Nie Tian was deliberately avoiding his question. He was so angry that his face turned pale. Master Liang, my master will be here soon. Do you want to stay and watch my brother's immortal foundation test? At this moment, Gao Yin stood up and said coldly. Since Liang Zhao did not have the respect of an elder, there was no need for him to be so polite. Let's go. Liang Zhao glared at Nie Tian. He knew that with Nie Tian here, he would not have a chance to do anything. He shouted and left with Feng Ren and the others. I won't send you off. Gao Yin snorted and did not even look at Liang Zhao and the others. Gao Yin, the battle between our 2 villages is about to begin. Take care of yourself. Before leaving, Feng Ren, who had lost a hand to Nie Tian, shot a fierce glance at Gao Yin, a cold smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Gao Yin's mouth twitched, but he did not say anything. They are all from the Fengtian sect? Nie Tian waited until Liang Zhao and the others were far away before asking. Yes. Gao Yin nodded his head and said, That middle-aged man is called Liang Zhao. He is an outer sect elder of the Fengtian sect. The others are his disciples. That Liang Zhao seems to want to test your brother's immortal foundation. What is going on? Nie Tian nodded his head and asked. Gao Yan's gaze slightly froze. He paused for a moment and said, My brother is 6 years old this year. Not long ago, I discovered that his immortal foundation is not bad. It is very likely that he has the fire spirit physique of the 5 immortal physique. I reported this matter to the sect. The sect decided to let my master come and test my brother's immortal foundation. But I don't know how this news was leaked. Liang Zhao also knew about it. He actually came before my master and wanted to forcefully test my brother's immortal foundation. Nie Tian frowned and said, What benefits does Liang Zhao get from testing your brother's immortal foundation? I don't know. Gao Yin shook his head and said, I am not familiar with Liang Zhao, but his disciple Feng Ren, the guy whose hand was injured by you, is from our neighboring village, Feng Village. I suspect that Liang Zhao and Feng Ren are up to no good, so I don't dare to let them test my brother. Yes. Nie Tian slightly nodded his head. Gao Yan's concerns were indeed very necessary. Liang Zhao and the others being so forceful was indeed very suspicious. When will your master arrive? Then, Nie Tian asked again. Gao Yan's expression slightly darkened. He shook his head and said, According to the agreed time, master should have arrived a long time ago. Why is he not here yet? He was a little worried. Could something have happened to him? But this was Feng Ming Mountain. There shouldn't be anyone who would dare to make a move against the Fengtian sect. Then, Nie Tian and Gao Yan waited for a long time, but Gao Yan's master did not arrive. The two discussed for a while and decided to go out of the village to take a look. Nie Tian said goodbye to Qing Qi and Mo Rushi, and then left Gaoyu village with Gao Yan. The two walked along the path out of the village, quickly all the way, and soon arrived at the heaven stairway to the Fengtian sect. This is the only way for the Fengtian sect to reach Gaoyu village. Why don't I see Master's figure? Gao Yan murmured and could not help but become even more worried. He had great respect for his master and knew that the latter was a person who kept his promise. If there was no accident, how could he be missing for so long? At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly heard the faint sound of fighting in the distance, and his face could not help but change. Nie Tian, what's wrong with you? Gao Yan noticed that Nie Tian's expression was strange, and he could not help but be nervous and asked nervously. Follow me. Nie Tian did not say much and directly ran in the direction of the fighting sound. Gao Yan did not know what happened, but the feeling of uneasiness in his heart grew stronger and stronger, and immediately followed. In the woods, several men in black surrounded a middle-aged woman who was standing in the middle of a blood-soaked woman. On the side, there were several men in green lying in disorder, motionless and obviously dead. Who are you people? The blood-soaked woman's body was swaying, and it was obvious that she was seriously injured, but she still persisted and asked in a deep voice. Is there any meaning to know the truth for a person who is about to die? The leader of the men in black spoke coldly, and suddenly waved his hand, and a palm fell from the void, and a violent force blasted down, directly toward the blood-soaked woman. The blood-soaked woman wanted to resist, but she was too injured and could not use her strength at all. Puff! At the moment of life and death, a sharp sound of air breaking came from the void, and a sword intent whistled over, directly smashing the fierce attack of the men in black. The next moment, a silver-haired figure descended and stood coldly in front of the blood-soaked woman, like a mountain, majestic and unyielding. It was Nie Tian. Chapter 45-79. Several men in black were shocked by the scene in front of them. When they realized that it was a young man standing in front of them, they were filled with killing intent. You are Puff. The woman was also very surprised. She was about to speak when she felt a surge of qi and blood and spat out a mouthful of blood. Master! Before Nie Tian could say anything, Gao Yan had already rushed over. Upon seeing the blood-soaked woman, he exclaimed in shock. The woman was none other than Qin Qinglan, the master he had been waiting for. Gao Yan. Qin Qinglan was surprised to see Gao Yan. Then his expression changed and he shouted, Get out of here! Do you think you can leave? A man in black sneered. He moved at an extremely fast speed like a ghost and came to Gao Yan's side in an instant. A murderous aura spread out and covered the void dozens of meters around him. Gao Yan. Qin Qinglan's pupils shrank involuntarily, and she screamed in fear. However, in the next moment, Nie Tian stretched out his hand, and a vigorous force lifted Qin Qinglan high into the sky. Then, an immense sword intent enveloped him like a protective shield. Then, Nie Tian took a step and the sword essence swept across the sky, forcing the men in black to retreat. Boy, go to hell! Almost at the same time, the black-clothed man made his move. He sneered, and a sinister palm pierced through the air, heading straight for Gao Yan. Celestial Sir! Gao Yan's heart sank and his face stiffened as he felt the oppressive force coming towards him. He didn't expect that the man in black was a Celestial Sir, and it was very likely that he was a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir. He was only a Celestial Master in the second stage. How could he resist the fatal palm of a Heaven Stage Celestial Sir in the fourth stage? At the moment of life and death, Gao Yan suddenly felt a powerful force surging behind him, which made his whole body tremble, and he involuntarily hit out with his palm. Bang! The two palms collided and the void exploded. Gao Yan didn't move at all, but the man in black was hit by the impact and took several steps back. Gao Yan was shocked by the scene in front of him, but he immediately reacted and was overjoyed. Gao Yan, you step aside. But the next moment, he heard Nye Tian's voice. Then he realized that Nye Tian was helping him from behind. Be careful. Gao Yin nodded. He knew that he couldn't help facing such an enemy, so he stepped aside obediently. Nye Tian waved his hand and released a powerful sword essence, which turned into a sword shield that wrapped Gao Yin. Only then did he feel at ease. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a chilling intent swept across the group of black-clothed people. He said indifferently, "Let me deal with you. Boy, who are you?" The leader of the black-clothed men realized that Nye Tian's strength was not to be underestimated. He suppressed his shock and asked in a deep voice. The fact that Nye Tian was able to block his palm strike and help a celestial master fight a celestial duke head-on showed how powerful he was. However, the black-clothed man could not understand why Nye Tian, who looked to be in his 20s, had such strength. "Beat me or get lost." Nye Tian didn't want to talk nonsense and said directly. "Boy, you're too arrogant." The other black-clothed man was furious. He roared and swung the saber in his hand. The saber in his hand slashed down fiercely. The saber intent was endless, turning into a deadly saber shadow. Nye Tian didn't move at all. He stood still and blocked the saber shadow with his sword momentum. How is this possible? The black-clothed swordsman was horrified and immediately shouted. He was a fourth realm earth stage celestial, sir. Combined with his saber intent, he could threaten a heaven stage celestial, sir. But Nye Tian was calm and looked very relaxed. He was much more powerful than a heaven stage celestial, sir. Could it be that this silver-haired young man was a fifth realm celestial, sir? But he had never heard of a 20-year-old celestial, sir, from the Fengtian sect. Because Gao Yen called Qin Qinglan master, the man in black naturally regarded Nye Tian as a member of the Fengtian sect. Nye Tian was indeed a member of the Fengtian sect, but not the Fengtian sect here. In the sky, Qin Qinglan, who was covered by the sword intent shield, was also shocked by Nye Tian's strength. Her eyes trembled slightly, and it took a long time for her to react. She had been seriously injured when fighting with these men in black, so she naturally knew their strength. However, the fact that Nye Tian was able to deal with the black-clothed man with ease was too unexpected. "Let's kill him together." The leader of the men in black made a prompt decision. His figure flashed, and in the blink of an eye, there were 8 illusory figures. At the same time, the figures of the other men in black also moved. Their steps were filled with the chi of the formation. Immortal formation? Nye Tian saw that the positions of the men in black were very regular, and there was a faint mysterious power surging in the void. His eyes couldn't help but sink. These men in black were all immortal masters. If they joined forces to set up the immortal formation, it would be very disadvantageous to Nye Tian. Nye Tian was very unfamiliar with the immortal formation. If he fell into it, it would be difficult to break it. "Step back." Qin Qinglan, who was high up in the sky, was shocked and shouted. She could see that Nye Tian's strength should be around the 5th realm human stage, celestial, sir. If he fell into the immortal formation of the men in black, it would be terrible. Unfortunately, it was too late by the time she finished speaking. Boom! In an instant, the immortal formation was unfolded and directly enveloped Nye Tian. Nye Tian immediately felt an oppressive force coming from the void, making it difficult for him to breathe. However, that was all there was to it. "Boy, you're dead." Seeing that Nye Tian was trapped in the formation, the leader of the men in black sneered and said in a deep voice, "Under the 9 tribulations formation, unless you have the cultivation of a heaven stage celestial, sir, you are doomed to hate. Is that so?" Nye Tian smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth raised indifferently, as if he was mocking. "How dare you be so arrogant when you're about to die?" The leader of the men in black suddenly became furious. He raised his hands, and suddenly the void seemed to be responding to him. A powerful force rolled out and pressed towards Nye Tian. Although Nye Tian was trapped in the 9 tribulations formation, he did not panic at all. His footwork was calm, and at the same time, he unsheathed the sword in the sky and slashed down, resolving the crisis in front of him. The leader of the men in black's face darkened. He suddenly felt that Nye Tian's sword essence seemed to have increased several times in an instant, which surprised him a lot. But he was still very calm and said in a deep voice, "It seems that I have underestimated you." It turned out that Nye Tian had hidden his strength just now, no wonder he was so confident. But this was nothing. The leader of the men in black was very confident in the 9 tribulations formation, unless Nye Tian was a heaven stage celestial sir. But there were only a few heaven stage celestial sir in the entire immortal Qi continent, and Nye Tian was so young, it was impossible for him to have the cultivation of a heaven stage celestial sir. Your 9 tribulations formation is just SOSO. Nye Tian's mouth twitched and he said indifferently, "Why don't I show you my formation?" Boom, boom, boom. As soon as he finished speaking, sword essence rose from the surroundings like a giant dragon, roaring and shaking the heaven and earth. The leader of the men in black was very surprised, and for a moment, he was speechless. 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, open! The corner of Nye Tian's mouth rose slightly, and as soon as he finished speaking, the sword formation was opened. Bang! And at the same moment the sword formation was opened, the void rumbled, and the 9 tribulations formation shattered. Chapter 4580. The 12 heaven attacking sword formation was opened, and the 9 tribulations formation was broken. Boom! Suddenly, as the 2 formations were opened and broken, the majestic impact surged, forcing all the men in black to retreat. How is this possible? The leader of the men in black steadied his body and looked at the scene in front of him in horror. He couldn't believe it. The 9 tribulations formation was his last trump card. How could it be broken in an instant? Who was Nye Tian? How could he have such strength? There were many questions in his mind, and his face was full of horror. The other men in black were all injured to varying degrees, and they all looked at Nye Tian in horror. The silver-haired young man in front of them was far beyond their expectations. He was too terrifying. Qin Qinglan, who was high up in the sky, was also shocked by the scene just now. Her bloody lips trembled slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she couldn't make a sound. At that moment, the power that erupted from Nye Tian was too horrible. She had only seen it from celestial primes. Could it be that this young swordsman, who looked only 20 years old, was really a celestial prime? Gao Yin was so shocked that he was like a wooden chicken. He felt like he was in a dream and was in a daze. Only at this moment did he truly realize how vast the gap between him and Nye Tian was. Perhaps the difference between heaven and earth couldn't even be described with words. "I don't want to kill anyone today. Why don't you get out of here?" Nye Tian's eyes were cold. He glanced at the men in black and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." The leader of the men in black trembled. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nye Tian would let them go. He didn't dare to delay, so he roared and left first. The other men in black immediately followed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After Nye Tian was sure that the men in black had left, he put away his sword and shield and released Qin Qinglan and Gao Yin. "Thank you for your help, little brother Nye Tian. I, Qin Qinglan, will never forget your kindness for saving my life." Qin Qinglan recovered a little in the sword and shield. She came to Nye Tian and thanked him solemnly. She didn't know Nye Tian's identity, so she was very respectful. "Qin Shi, you're being too serious." Nye Tian nodded slightly, but his expression was a little ugly. Since Gao Yin called Liang Zhao Master Liang, Nye Tian directly called Qin Qinglan Master Qin. "Nye Tian, why didn't you kill them?" Gao Yin, on the other hand, was somewhat puzzled. He looked at Nye Tian and said, "Letting a tiger return to the mountain will cause endless trouble in the future." Because his master had been seriously injured by these black-clothed men, and several of his fellow disciples had been killed, He was clearly unhappy that Nie Tian had let the black-clothed men leave. Pfft. Nie Tian frowned. Just as he was about to explain, his chest suddenly tightened and he spat out a mouthful of filthy blood. His face instantly became as pale as paper. Nie Tian, are you hurt? Gao Yin was taken aback. He was shocked. When he saw Nie Tian destroy the black-robed man's 9 tribulations formation, he thought that the latter's strength could crush the black-robed man. He didn't expect that he would also be injured. And from the looks of it, his injuries were not light. I'm fine. Nie Tian took a deep breath and looked a little better. He endured the sharp pain in his body and forced a smile. He had long felt that the environment here had a certain suppression on his martial body, so his strength had been weakened a lot. More importantly, every time he operated his primordial meridian, it seemed that the suppression in the void would increase. Just now, when he forcibly activated the 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, the pressure on his primordial meridian had almost reached the limit. If not, he would not have let the black-clothed men go so easily. In addition, Nie Tian had not recovered from his serious injury, so at this time, his qi and blood were not flowing smoothly, and he directly spat out filthy blood. Gao Yen, deal with their bodies. I'll examine them for Nie Tian. The blood on Qin Qinglan's body gradually dissipated. As he spoke, he looked at Nie Tian with some doubt in his eyes. Okay. Gao Yin agreed and began to deal with the bodies of his fellow disciples. On the side, Nie Tian noticed that Qin Qinglan's gaze was strange. He couldn't help but ask with a smile, Master Qin, why are you looking at me like this? I feel a completely different and unfamiliar aura from you. Qin Qinglan's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed. She did not have any scruples and directly asked, You're not from the immortal Qi continent, are you? Yes. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and then nodded. Since the other party had already seen through him, there was no point in hiding it anymore. Immediately, Nie Tian briefly explained his origin, and finally said, Master Qin, it was really an accident that we came to the immortal Qi continent this time. Now we want to visit the Fengtian sect and ask to see the Supreme Immortal Master. Please help us. After listening to Nie Tian's words, Qin Qinglan calmed down after a long time and said, You saved my life, so I will naturally help you. However, my position in the Fengtian sect is low. Even if I want to help you, I can only bring you into the Fengtian sect at most. It is almost impossible for you to see the Immortal Master. I know that the Supreme Immortal Master is of high status, but I sincerely ask to see him. Please pass the message for me, Master Qin. Nie Tian frowned and said in a heavy tone. Qin Qinglan shook his head helplessly and said, You don't know, the Immortal Master has been in seclusion for more than 10 years. These years, the affairs of the sect have been handled by the 3 Immortal Masters. Previously, there were also high-level people from other sects who asked to see the Immortal Master, but they were all rejected. With that, Qin Qinglan looked at Nie Tian and continued, Even if you are an outsider, I'm afraid the hope of seeing the Immortal Master is slim. This. Nie Tian frowned and was speechless for a while. It seemed that it was not easy to see the Fengtian Immortal. Nie Tian, you don't have to worry. When Gao Yan's matters are settled, I will take you into the Fengtian sect. At that time, you can go see the 3 Immortal Masters and explain the situation to them. Qin Qinglan did not know why Nie Tian had to see the Fengtian Immortal, so he could only comfort him. Okay. Nie Tian had no choice but to nod his head. Then, after Gao Yen dealt with the corpses, the 3 returned to Gaoyu village and soon arrived at the Gao clan. Master, you are seriously injured. Why don't we wait for the immortal root test until tomorrow? Gao Yin said as he walked in front of them. No need, I want to finish the immortal root test as soon as possible and return to the Fengtian sect as soon as possible to report to the sect about the attack. Qin Qinglan seemed to be very anxious and said in a deep voice, Okay then, I will call Gao Jin out now. Gao Yin nodded and quickly brought out a little boy of 6 or 7 years old. The little boy looked strong and had a chubby face. His eyes were like black gems, extremely lively. Master, this is my brother, Gao Jin. Gao Yin brought Gao Jin in front of Qin Qinglan, looking a little excited. Qin Qinglan's beautiful eyes darkened slightly. After they fell on Gao Jin, she could not move her eyes away. Brother. After all, Gao Jin was still young. He could not help but be a little afraid of being stared at by a stranger. He could not help but take 2 steps back and pull the corner of Gao Yan's clothes. Don't be afraid, I am here. Gao Yan immediately squatted down and held Gao Jin's little hand. Then, he looked at Qin Qinglan and asked uneasily, Master, what did you see? Qin Qinglan's expression was a little strange. She seemed to be very shocked, but at the same time, she was a little uneasy, as if she was worried about something. Chapter 45-81. Qin Qinglan didn't seem to hear Gao Yan's words. He kept staring at Gao Jin, and his expression became more and more strange. Master, what's wrong? Say something. Gao Yin couldn't help but ask again. Gao Jin seemed to feel threatened by Qin Qinglan. He kept retreating, trying to hide behind Gao Yin. Nie Tian frowned. He didn't sense anything unusual from Gao Jin. Perhaps the immortal world here had seriously affected his perception. I don't think so, I don't think so. After a long time, Qin Qinglan finally spoke, but he seemed to be in a daze. He kept shaking his head and murmuring, Master, what are you talking about? What's going on? Gao Yin was anxious and afraid. He couldn't help but take a step forward and ask seriously. Gao Yin, I'm going to test Gao Jin's immortal root immediately. Qin Qinglan calmed down, as if he didn't hear Gao Yan's words at all. Okay. Gao Yin didn't know what Qin Qinglan had discovered, so he could only nod. Qin Qinglan took a deep breath and flipped his palm, holding a jade-white compass. Looking closely, the compass was divided into 3 layers. Each layer could be rotated freely, and there was a mysterious flow of immortal force on it. The design was extremely delicate. Gao Yin, you should know what to do. Qin Qinglan handed the compass to Gao Yin and nodded slightly. There was a hidden worry in his eyes, as if he was worried about something terrible. Gao Yin nodded and took the compass. He touched Gao Jin's head and said, Little brother, don't be afraid. Do what I tell you to do, okay? Okay. Gao Jin nodded, obviously trusting his brother very much. Little brother, give me your hand. Gao Yin glanced at Qin Qinglan, obviously noticing his abnormality, but he still said it. Gao Jin obediently extended his little hand. Gao Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, and his fingertips touched Gao Jin's little hand lightly. A thin wound appeared, and blood flowed out. Brother, it hurts. Gao Jin looked at his bleeding hand, but he was not afraid. He just whispered, It's okay. It'll be fine in a while. Gao Yin forced out a smile and held Gao Jin's little hand, letting the blood drip onto the compass. At the instant the blood dripped onto the ground, the compass actually started to rotate. Light flowed on it, and strange symbols appeared on it. Gao Yin was not in a hurry. He quietly looked at the compass in his hand, as if waiting for something. This is the Immortal Foundation test? Nie Tian watched from the side and couldn't help but mutter curiously. Gao Yin glanced at Nie Tian and explained. This compass is called the Immortal Compass. It is used to test immortal root. The strength of a person's immortal root could be judged by 3 levels: Immortal Palace, Immortal Elephant, and Immortal Spirit. The Immortal Disc is divided into 3 layers, and they are used to test the Immortal Palace, Immortal Elephant, and Immortal Spirit respectively. I see. Nie Tian nodded and couldn't help but ask, then how do we determine the strength of the Immortal Palaces, Immortal Elephants, and Immortal Spirits? Normally, the strength of the Immortal Palace, Immortal Elephant, and Immortal Spirit are ranked from the lowest to the highest. Gao Yin observed the changes of the symbols on the compass and said, The immortal palace, immortal elephant, and immortal spirit of a normal person are of the same level. Even if there is a difference, it won't be too big. Nie Tian nodded and was instantly curious about Gao Jin's immortal root. On the immortal disk, the symbols flowed, forming a colorful halo in the air. It was extremely beautiful. Nie Tian stared at the symbols for a long time, and finally realized that these symbols seemed to be moving according to some kind of pattern, and were slowly condensing. As the symbols condensed faster and faster, the light on the immortal disk became brighter and brighter. Soon, it became blinding white, almost blinding. A moment later, the symbols condensed into 3 scarlet words on the immortal disk. 999. Immortal Palace, Immortal Elephant, and Immortal Spirit are all at the 9th level. No matter how stupid Nie Tian was, he could see the result and couldn't help but exclaim. All 3 are at the 9th level. This is the highest result. I really have the body of the fire spirit. Gao Yin was also excited. He couldn't help but look at Qin Qinglan, who was so excited that he almost jumped up. However, at this moment, Qin Qinglan looked terrible. His lips were trembling, and he seemed to be saying something in a low voice. Master, what's wrong with you? Gao Yin was shocked by Qin Qinglan. The smile on his face froze, and he asked in a trembling voice. How could this be? How could this be? How could this be? Qin Qinglan's mouth twitched slightly, and he shook his head repeatedly. He couldn't accept the result in front of him. Gao Yin was puzzled and shocked. The body of the fire spirit that Gao Jin had tested was one of the supreme immortal root. Why did Qin Qinglan have such a reaction? Is this result not good? Nie Tian was also confused. Qin Qinglan had been behaving strangely since he saw Gao Jin, which was really puzzling. Brother, what's wrong with my sister? Gao Jin scratched his head and looked up at Gao Yin. After all, he was still a child, and he had no idea what was going on. Gao Yin waved his hand to signal Gao Jin not to speak. He didn't dare to ask Qin Qinglan again, and could only wait at the side. After a long time, Qin Qinglan calmed down a little, but his eyes were fixed on the celestial plate. He seemed to be hesitating, and at the same time, he was afraid of something. Gao Yin opened the celestial plate. After a while, Qin Qinglan finally made up his mind and said seriously, Master, why do you open the celestial plate? Gao Yin couldn't help but ask with a puzzled look. Open it. Qin Qinglan didn't explain, but said in an unquestionable tone. Okay. Gao Yin had no choice but to open the celestial plate slowly, layer by layer. When he opened the 3rd layer, he saw a strange pattern in the center of the celestial plate, which made his expression stagnate and he was stunned. Nie Tian frowned and stretched his head to take a look. There was a black pattern in the center of the immortal plate. It was a faint inverted cross. Although it did not give off any aura, it gave off an extremely evil feeling. It's a predestined fate, a predestined fate. When Qin Qinglan saw the evil pattern, he seemed to have expected it, so he wasn't too surprised. He was just shocked, and then he sighed repeatedly. Master Qin, what does this mean? Nie Tian was confused, and he couldn't help but ask Qin Qinglan. This is the triple evil's celestial root. Qin Qinglan sighed, and then he suddenly turned around, a pair of cold eyes fixed on Gao Jin, and said word by word, I want to bring this child back to the sect. Master, don't. Little brother is still a child, he doesn't know anything. Gao Yin, who was standing aside, suddenly reacted as if he had just woken up from a dream, and he directly knelt in front of Qin Qinglan, begging bitterly. The triple evil's celestial root, the body that brings disaster to the world. Qin Qinglan didn't look at Gao Yin at all. His eyes were fixed on Gao Jin, and he almost spat out 4 words from between his teeth. You must not let him live. Chapter 45-82. I can't let him live. When these words came out of Qin Qinglan's mouth, the killing intent in her eyes could no longer be suppressed. Her entire body was like a ferocious beast, as if she would pounce out in the next moment and directly tear the 6-year-old boy in front of her into pieces. "Brother, I'm afraid." Gao Jin was frightened by Qin Qinglan's sudden action and cried. He subconsciously hid behind Gao Yan. However, Qin Qinglan directly stretched out her big hand, not caring that Gao Jin was just a child. She grabbed him like a sharp claw. "Stop!" At this moment, a low shout was heard. A figure took a step forward. The sword intent around him was furious. The invisible momentum rolled like waves and forced Qin Qinglan to step back several meters. Qin Qinglan directly sat on the ground and looked extremely embarrassed. "Nie Tian, you!" Qin Qinglan reacted very quickly. She instantly stood up and looked at Nie Tian cold. After a pause, she said seriously, "This is the Feng Tian sect's business. Please don't interfere." "Gao Yan, what's going on?" Nie Tian glanced at Qin Qinglan and ignored her. Instead, he asked Gao Yan in a deep voice. Although he had already guessed it, he couldn't be sure. He had to ask Gao Yan to explain in person. Gao Yan looked at Qin Qinglan in horror and hesitated to speak. "She's going to kill your brother. Why are you still looking at her?" Nie Tian's face darkened and he said cold. Gao Yan looked terrible and couldn't say a word. "Since he doesn't dare to say it, you do it." Nie Tian glanced at Gao Yan and then turned to Qin Qinglan and said. Qin Qinglan calmed down a lot. She let out a long sigh and said, "Gao Jin doesn't have the body of fire spirit, but the immortal root of 3 evils. Make it clear." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly and he said in a deep voice, "The immortal root is the most important in cultivation." Qin Qinglan seemed to be a little afraid of Nie Tian. She explained, "Among the immortal roots, the most powerful ones are called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spirits, 1 absolute, 2 sins, 3 evils, 4 annihilations, and 5 spirit. However, apart from the 5 spirits, the 1 absolute, 2 sins, 3 evils, and 4 annihilations are all forbidden bodies, in other words, immortal roots that bring calamity to the world." "And his immortal root," Qin Qinglan looked at Gao Jin and said, "is one of the legendary 3 evils immortal roots, the heavenly lonely evil body." The moment he mentioned the heavenly lonely evil body, Qin Qinglan's eyes were full of killing intent again. "You want to kill him just because of this?" Nie Tian didn't think much of it. He frowned slightly and asked indifferently. "Lonely sky fiend physique, immortal root that brings calamity to the world. He will definitely bring calamity to the immortal Qi continent in the future." Qin Qinglan was stunned at first, and then said fiercely, "Future?" Nie Tian smiled and asked again, "Because he didn't do anything wrong, you want to kill him? Lonely sky fiend physique, lonely star fate. If we let him live, even we will die because of him." Qin Qinglan's expression was a bit strange. She didn't expect Nie Tian to be so calm and tried to explain. She thought that it might be because Nie Tian wasn't from the divine Qi continent, so he couldn't understand how terrifying the lonely sky fiend physique was. However, the lonely star fate was a predestined fate. It was destined that everyone who came into contact with it would die because of it. Lonely star fate? Nie Tian laughed coldly when he heard these words, as if he had heard a joke. What are you laughing at?" Qin Qinglan was surprised. Obviously, she didn't expect Nie Tian to be so indifferent. "What if I tell you that I'm a fiend god who doesn't allow the fate of heaven and earth?" Nie Tian twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "I've never believed in fate. If fate is real, then won't heaven and earth die because of me?" "You?" Qin Qinglan was stunned. Obviously, she didn't expect Nie Tian to say such a thing. "You said that this child has a immortal root that brings calamity to the world. What do you have to do with fate?" Nie Tianling laughed and said, "A person's fate is in his own hands. What does it have to do with fate? This child is just a little more talented, but you regard him as a disaster and want to kill him. Don't you know that it's your desire to kill that makes him want to resist?" It also makes him hate this world. Even his killing in the future is because of you. In this world, there's no natural good or evil. No matter how evil a person is, there's always a good side, and no matter how good a person is, there's always an evil side. And Gao Jin is just a child. He doesn't have a complete concept of good and evil. If you kill him, you'll be the biggest evil person. I won't allow it. Qin Qinglan looked at Nie Tian and felt the determination in his eyes. She couldn't help but be stunned and didn't speak for a long time. Gao Yin was also stunned. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nie Tian would directly fight against Qin Qinglan. Originally, Nie Tian had nothing to do with this matter, and he could have just stood by and watched. But he actually intervened, which was really unexpected. After all, Nie Tian still had a favor to ask of Qin Qinglan, and he still had to visit the Fengtian sect. But what he did now was going against the Fengtian sect. Although Gao Jin was young, he could also see that Nie Tian was protecting him. His eyes flashed with a strange light, as if he was thinking about something. Nie Tian, even if I want to let Gao Jin go, the Fengtian sect will never give up. After a while, Qin Qinglan calmed down and looked at Gao Yin. He said, "Not long ago, a disciple of the Fengtian sect was tested to be an evil spirit, and he was executed on the spot." "Master, are you talking about Han Mang?" Gao Yin immediately thought of someone and couldn't help but ask. "Yes." Qin Qinglan nodded. Gao Yan's expression changed. He said, "Han Mang is the grandson of the Inquisitor." "Yes." Qin Qinglan sighed and said bitterly, "The evil spirit that Han Mang tested was far less powerful than the sky evil body. But even so, he still had to be executed, even if he was the grandson of the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor was one of the 3 immortals of the Fengtian sect. The Fengtian immortal was in seclusion, and everything in the Fengtian sect was managed by the 3 immortals. Han Mang was the grandson of the Inquisitor, but once his immortal root was found to be an evil spirit, he would still be executed on the spot. This showed how strict the Fengtian sect's rules were. Since the Fengtian sect didn't even care about Han Mang's identity, how could they let Gao Jin go? Moreover, Gao Jin's immortal root was one of the 3 evils, which was far superior to the average immortal root of an evil spirit. Then Gao Yin certainly understood the meaning of Qin Qinglan's words. His face was as pale as wax, not to mention how ugly he was. No matter what, the Fengtian sect won't let Gao Jin go. Qin Qinglan glanced at Gao Jin and said, "If I bring Gao Jin back to the sect now, I might be able to leave his corpse intact. You can't take him away with me here." Nie Tian said coldly and stood in front of Gao Jin. "Nie Tian, you've just arrived at the deity Qi continent, so you don't understand what the 3 evils immortal root means. This isn't something you can meddle in. Don't get involved in this mess, okay?" Qin Qinglan took a deep breath and almost begged Nie Tian. She didn't want to go against Nie Tian. He had saved her life before, and she had a good impression of him. But Gao Jin's matter was too big. If Nie Tian insisted on interfering, he would only lose his life. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to interfere with Gao Jin's matter." Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he spoke calmly. He wasn't afraid, and he wasn't going to give in. Chapter 45-83. "I'll take care of it." Nie Tian's words took Qin Qinglan aback, and she went blank for a moment. She didn't expect that Nie Tian would be so determined to protect Gao Jin. "Nie Tian, I know you're powerful, but with all due respect, you can't fight against the whole Fengtian sect alone," Qin Qinglan said in a low voice after she calmed down completely. "Only the 3 of us know that Gao Jin has the 3 evils fairy root. Gao Yin and I won't tell anyone, and I believe Master Qin won't either." Nie Tian raised his eyebrows and said, "Since we won't tell anyone, how will the Fengtian sect know?" "Nie Tian, what do you mean?" Qin Qinglan frowned and her face darkened. She had made the biggest concession by not taking Gao Jin away, but Nye Tian still wanted her to keep the secret. It was outrageous. Nye Tian stared coldly at Qin Qinglan, a hint of killing intent rising in his eyes. Master Qin, I saved your life, so you'll keep a secret from me. That's not too much, is it? You. Qin Qinglan keenly sensed the killing intent in Nye Tian's eyes. She was shocked and couldn't say anything for a while. No, that means you agree. Nye Tian smiled and didn't want to say anything more. No. Qin Qinglan's eyes trembled violently and she said, I can't do that. If I hide this and cause trouble with the acquired evil body, wouldn't I be a sinner of the sect? Nye Tian's eyes grew grim. Qin Qinglan was indeed stubborn when it came to predestination. After a moment of pondering, Nye Tian looked at Gao Yan and asked, Gao Yan, do you want your brother to live? Yes, of course. Gao Yan replied without hesitation. Okay, then listen to me. Nye Tian nodded and said to Qin Qinglan, Master Qin, you just need to keep the secret from me. When I return from my visit to the Fengtian sect, I will take Gao Jin away and never return to the immortal Qi continent. Hearing Nye Tian's words, Gao Yan and Qin Qinglan changed their expressions at the same time. Gao Yan didn't expect Nye Tian's solution to be like this. Qin Qinglan, however, hadn't expected Nye Tian to be so bold. What if I don't agree? After a while, Qin Qinglan came to her senses. Her eyes suddenly flashed, and she stared at Nye Tian and asked, Then I have no choice but to kill you, Nye Tian said word by word without avoiding Qin Qinglan's gaze. Qin Qinglan was overwhelmed with shock, and she actually became absent-minded for a moment. She retreated a few steps and almost fell down. Nye Tian's eyes were really too frightening. Even if it was just a flash of killing intent, it gave people a cold feeling as if they had fallen into an icehouse. I will keep it a secret. After a while, Qin Qinglan recovered and nodded. Very well, I believe that Master Qin is a man of his word. Nye Tian smiled faintly and secretly let out a sigh of relief. He didn't want to kill Qin Qinglan, but if he was forced to do so, he would also kill a flower. Fortunately, Qin Qinglan was not a bad person. She didn't push things to the extreme. It's already late today. We will go back to the Fengtian sect tomorrow morning, Qin Qinglan said wearily, looking a little tired. Okay. Nye Tian agreed. After saying goodbye to Gao Yan, he directly left. Nye Tian. Looking at Nye Tian's back, Qin Qinglan shouted his name in her heart. Since she set foot on the path of cultivation, she had never been so embarrassed as she was today. Even when facing the killing intent of the man in black not long ago, she could still keep calm. However, in the face of Nye Tian, she completely panicked. She couldn't explain it clearly. There seemed to be a kind of momentum around Nye Tian, which made people unable to help but obey. Master, Gao Yan looked at Qin Qinglan and was about to speak, but was interrupted by her. Don't worry. Since I have promised to keep it a secret, I will not tell anyone. Qin Qinglan's eyes were deep, and she looked even more tired. Thank you, Master. Gao Yan nodded and silently led Gao Jin into the room. Under the curtain of the night, only Qin Qinglan was left, looking a little lonely. Early the next morning, Nye Tian came to the small courtyard of the Gao family with Qing Qi and Mo Rushi. Qin Qinglan looked at Qing Qi and Mo Rushi, who were standing behind Nye Tian, and asked coldly, Who are they? This is my friend Qing Qi, and this is my wife Mo Rushi. They will go to the Fengtian sect with me. Nye Tian didn't avoid the topic and introduced them lightly. Qin Qinglan frowned slightly. She glanced at Qing Qi and then her eyes fell on Mo Rushi. She admitted that although she was not a beauty that could cause the downfall of a city, her facial features could still be considered elegant. However, at this moment, she had to admit that Mo Rushi made her feel a sense of inferiority. Among all the women she had seen, Mo Rushi's appearance was definitely in the top 3, even if she was not the most beautiful. Moreover, Mo Rushi's beauty had a kind of otherworldly feeling, like an orchid in an empty valley, fresh and unique. Let's go. Qin Qinglan nodded and walked in the front. This time, Gao Yin didn't go back to the Fengtian sect with Nie Tian and the others. Instead, he stayed in Gaoyu village to deal with the upcoming battle between Gaoyu village and Fang village. As for the battle between the two villages, Nie Tian didn't intend to intervene. It was better to let Gao Yin and the others handle it themselves. After leaving Gaoyu village with Nie Tian and the others, Qin Qinglan went straight to the Fengtian sect. Soon, the four of them came to the entrance of the Fengtian sect. You guys step back a little. Qin Qinglan stood outside the invisible door and motioned for Nie Tian and the others to step back. Nie Tian and the others stepped aside. Qing Qi looked at Qin Qinglan curiously, wanting to see how the latter opened the invisible door. Qin Qinglan took out a jade token and activated the immortal power in his palm. The jade token released a ray of light, which hit the center of the invisible door. Boom! Suddenly, a mysterious force was released, and the invisible door opened. Please. Qin Qinglan nodded and let Nie Tian and the others enter. Thank you. Nie Tian answered and was the first to walk in. This time, there was no obstruction, and they easily entered the door. Mo Rushi and Qing Qi immediately followed, and Qin Qinglan was the last to enter. After entering, Nie Tian immediately felt that there was a mysterious force flowing in the space around him. It was somewhat similar to the 9 elemental force, but not the same. It seemed to be purer and gentler. Is this the aura of immortal power? Nie Tian murmured. He couldn't help but feel a little excited. The Fengtian sect is isolated from the outside world. The immortal power within the sect is several times denser than in the outside world. It's not surprising that you can feel the aura of immortal power. Qin Qinglan glanced at Nie Tian and said lightly. So that's how it is. Nie Tian smiled. He had thought that his perception had improved. Next, under Qin Qinglan's lead, Nie Tian and the others soon arrived at the immortal field of the Fengtian sect. The immortal field was not big, and it had a radius of about 1,000 meters. There were many cultivators in immortal robes sitting in the field. They were probably cultivating. What's that above their heads? Nie Tian asked curiously when he saw that there was something like a vortex above the heads of the cultivators in the immortal field. It's the immortal palace. Qin Qinglan responded cold. Just as she was about to leave with Nie Tian and the others, she suddenly felt something and her pretty face changed. Chapter 4584. Qin Qinglan's pretty face suddenly changed. She turned around and saw a familiar face, which made her look gloomy. It's this guy. Nie Tian followed Qin Qinglan's gaze and his heart sank. He was no stranger to the person walking towards him. It was Liang Zhao, the person who had appeared at Gao Yan's house not long ago and wanted to forcibly test Gao Jin's celestial foundation. Liang Zhao walked over leisurely, as if he didn't see Nie Tian. He fixed his eyes on Qin Qinglan and said with a meaningful smile, "What? Aren't you happy to see me? You and I have nothing to do with each other anymore." "It doesn't matter if you're happy or not," Qin Qinglan replied cold and walked away. "Qin Qinglan, when we were together, you couldn't wait to see me every day. Now, even if we are separated, we are still fellow disciples. Do you have to be so heartless?" Liang Zhao twitched the corner of his mouth and said lightly. His words made Qin Qinglan's body freeze. She stopped and turned around. "Liang Zhao, I don't want to talk about what happened in the past anymore. I hope you won't bring it up either." Qin Qinglan's eyes were cold as she spoke in a deep voice. Her eyes clearly belonged to a woman who had been deeply hurt. Seeing this, Nie Tian could not help but realize that there was such a relationship between the two. No wonder Liang Zhao had been focusing on Qin Qinglan and did not even notice the existence of Nie Tian. It was probably because of Qin Qinglan that Liang Zhao had appeared at Gao's house and wanted to forcibly test Gao Jin's celestial foundation. "Qin Qinglan, you're really heartless." Liang Zhao's face darkened and became cold. He suddenly turned his eyes and noticed the existence of Nye Tian. His eyes trembled violently and he said in surprise, "It's you." "Yes, it's me." Nye Tian smiled faintly. He was calm and indifferent. "How dare you come to the Fengtian sect?" Liang Zhao did not expect Nye Tian to be so calm. He immediately became angry and growled. "What does Master Liang mean by this? Why can't I come to the Fengtian sect?" Nye Tian frowned in confusion. "You've injured a disciple of the Fengtian sect, yet you're still so arrogant. You're clearly looking down on the Fengtian sect." Liang Zhao was still somewhat rational. His expression was incomparably gloomy, but he did not dare to make any moves. He knew Nye Tian's strength, so he didn't dare to take the risk when there was no chance of winning. If he were to lose to Nye Tian in front of so many disciples in the Fengtian sect, it would be a great humiliation. "Nye Tian, what's going on? How do you know him?" Qin Qinglan didn't know the situation, so she couldn't help but frown and ask coldly. Nye Tian smiled and briefly told him what happened at Gao Yan's house. Back at Gao Yan's house, because of Gao Jin's Sansha immortal root, he had actually forgotten about Liang Zhao. After listening, Qin Qinglan's pretty face was full of coldness, not for Nye Tian, but for Liang Zhao. "Liang Zhao, I think you're the one who has the guts." Qin Qinglan's pretty face was gloomy, and she asked coldly, "Gao Jin's immortal root test is a task assigned to me by the sect. What right do you have to overstep your authority?" "It's just a simple immortal root test. I was passing by Gaoyu village, so I did it for you. What's the matter?" Liang Zhao responded, still unwilling to let go of Nye Tian. He pointed at Nye Tian and said, "But this guy hurt my disciple and provoked the Fengtian sect. He's really arrogant." Facing the furious Liang Zhao, Nye Tian smiled and said, "Liang Zhao, when you appeared at Gao Yan's house, you were not entrusted by the Fengtian sect, but your own will. So at that time you couldn't represent the Fengtian sect. I hurt your disciple because they attacked me first. Just because they are disciples of the Fengtian sect, should I be beaten without moving? Liang Zhao, I must report this matter to the interrogator and let him make a fair decision." Before Liang Zhao could respond, Qin Qinglan continued, "Moreover, on my way to Gaoyu village, I was ambushed by men in black. The 5 disciples who went with me were all killed." "What? You were ambushed?" Hearing Qin Qinglan's words, Liang Zhao couldn't help but change his expression. He was extremely surprised. Nye Tian frowned, and it seemed that Liang Zhao's reaction was not fake. It seemed that the ambush of Qin Qinglan had nothing to do with Liang Zhao. "Liang Zhao, you arrived at the Gao family before me, and tried to force Gao Jin to do the immortal root test. After you failed, you returned to the sect and pestered me. It's hard not to connect the ambush of me with you." Qin Qinglan sneered and looked at Liang Zhao coldly. Liang Zhao was suddenly at a loss for words, and his expression was extremely ugly. At this time, many disciples of the Fengtian sect gathered around. Obviously, they all knew Qin Qinglan and Liang Zhao. Seeing them like this, they couldn't help but murmur. "What's wrong with Master Liang and Master Qin? Why are they fighting? I heard that Master Liang and Master Qin used to have a relationship, but Master Liang fell in love with someone else, so they didn't get together. It turns out that they have such a past. They won't fight, will they?" Everyone was discussing in low voices, and it was obvious that they were watching a good show. "Liang Zhao, this is not over." Qin Qinglan ignored the crowd. He looked at Liang Zhao coldly, then turned around and left. Nye Tian and the others naturally didn't want to stay any longer, so they immediately followed him. "Stop!" However, right at this moment a cold shout rang out and a white-clothed figure walked out from the crowd. His eyes were like a hawk's, releasing a sharp glint as he stared at Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but look at the figure in white. This was a young man in his 20s. He was dressed in white and had an elegant demeanor. His facial features were handsome and resolute, and his heroic spirit was compelling. Only his pair of eyes were a little gloomy, and people couldn't help but stay away from him. For some reason, this man in front of him made Nie Tian feel uneasy. The appearance of the man in white made the crowd restless. "Look, isn't that Bai Zixuan? It's really him. He is one of the top 10 geniuses of the Fengtian sect. He entered the fourth realm before the age of 20. It's really terrifying. I heard that Bai Zixuan went out for training. When did he come back?" Everyone was discussing, and their eyes were filled with unconcealable envy when they looked at Bai Zixuan. He was one of the top 10 geniuses of the Fengtian sect, a real God's favored one, and might even become a grand celestial in the future. Who wouldn't be envious of him? It turns out that he is a genius of the immortal Tao. Nie Tian felt a little uneasy in his heart, but his face was very calm. He asked with a smile, "What's the matter? Who are you?" Bai Zixuan's eyes were sharp like two sharp blades, as if they were going to pierce through people. He asked in a deep voice, "Does this have anything to do with you?" Nie Tian smiled. He felt that Bai Zixuan must have discovered something. "If you're an ordinary person, it naturally has nothing to do with me." Bai Zixuan's eyes narrowed slightly and he said, "But you don't belong to the Xianqi continent. You're from the outside world, so you must have come to the Fengtian sect for a reason." Chapter 45-85. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he heard Bai Zixuan's words. He didn't expect the other party to be able to tell that he wasn't from the immortal Qi continent at such a young age. It seemed that Bai Zixuan, as a genius of the immortal Tao, had some tricks up his sleeve. Bai Zixuan's words stirred the crowd. Bai Zixuan said that this guy isn't from the immortal Qi continent. What does that mean? If he's not from the immortal Qi continent, then where is he from? What is Bai Zixuan talking about? Why can't I understand? Among the crowd, many people's knowledge of the world had always been limited to the immortal Qi continent. They never knew that there were other worlds outside of the immortal Qi continent. Although the immortal Qi continent wasn't vast, there were still many unexplored areas. Many people even thought that the immortal Qi continent was a boundless continent. They were naturally surprised when they heard Bai Zixuan say that Nie Tian was from another world. "You're right. I'm not from the immortal Qi continent." Nie Tian smiled. "I came to the Fengtian sect only to pay a visit to the supreme immortal sovereign. I don't have any ulterior motives." "Is that so?" Bai Zixuan sneered, suspicion written all over his face. The Fengtian sect was a prominent existence in the immortal Tao. Which person who came to the Fengtian sect didn't come for the Fengtian sect's superior cultivation technique? Moreover, Nie Tian was from the outside world, so he must be very interested in the path of immortal cultivation. Nie Tian's answer caused the crowd's expressions to change. They burst into laughter and looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at a fool. This guy must be an idiot. Who does he think he is? How can he meet the supreme immortal sovereign so easily? He's indeed a fool from the outside world. He doesn't even know the most basic rules of the Fengtian sect. Not to mention him, even us disciples of the Fengtian sect aren't qualified to meet the supreme immortal sovereign. The Fengtian immortal was the supreme existence of the Fengtian sect. Naturally, not everyone could meet him. Nie Tian opened his mouth and said that he was here to pay a visit to the high immortal venerable. Of course, it attracted everyone's ridicule. Nie Tian only smiled in the face of the mockery and ridicule from all around. He didn't care at all. He had seen this kind of expression many times. They were just a bunch of idiots, there was no need to bother about it. "Boy, I don't care why you came to the Fengtian sect. I just want to tell you that the Fengtian sect doesn't welcome you. Please leave immediately." Bai Zixuan's eyes darkened. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Nie Tian anymore, so he said directly. Nie Tian's expression sank after sensing Bai Zixuan's determination. He no longer held back and said, Your name is Bai Zixian, right? Even if you are a genius of the Fengtian sect, you can't represent the entire Fengtian sect. The person I want to see is the High Immortal Venerable, not you. What right do you have to make me leave? Because I'm stronger than you. Bai Zixian's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward, and a burst of aura immediately spread out, causing the surrounding time and space to stagnate. It was as if an invisible force had locked the space, making people feel a strong sense of oppression. Nie Tian frowned a little. Sword Qi came out spontaneously, and an invisible sharp and fierce force broke through the void, instantly dispelling the pressure of the void. Bai Zixian's expression suddenly changed, unable to conceal the surprise in his heart. Obviously, he didn't expect that Nie Tian would have such strength. Nie Tian's action made everyone's eyes lit up, and they immediately became excited. I can't tell. This guy is so young, but his strength can't be underestimated. He can actually fight Bai Zixian head-on. Bai Zixian broke through to the 4th stage Celestial Lord a few years ago. This time, when he returned from the outside world, he should at least be an Earth stage Celestial Lord. Earth stage Celestial Lord? I think Bai Zixian's cultivation should be at least a Heaven stage Celestial Lord. This silver-haired boy doesn't look like a good person. Let's see if he is a match for Bai Zixian. Everyone spoke one after another. Obviously, they didn't intend to let go of this opportunity to watch a good show. Of course, they knew that in addition to Bai Zixian's outstanding talent, he was also arrogant and unyielding. He had never been submissive to anyone. How could he lower his head to a person from the outside world? Bai Zixian, I brought Nie Tian into the sect. Please don't make things difficult for him. At this time, Qin Qinglan couldn't stand it anymore, so she stepped forward and said. Although she didn't like Nie Tian, he had saved her life after all. She still knew how to repay his kindness. Bai Zixian looked at Qin Qinglan cold, and said in a deep voice, If you don't want to be embarrassed, step aside. Qin Qinglan's beautiful eyes trembled, and her small mouth was wide open. Obviously, she didn't expect that Bai Zixian would refute her in public. Bai Zixian was indeed a genius, but no matter how strong he was just a disciple. Qin Qinglan's status was not high, but she was still an elder. Moreover, she was an elder, so she shouldn't be ignored like this. In fact, in Bai Zixian's opinion, he had been very polite. If it wasn't for Qin Qinglan's status as an elder, he would have directly asked her to get lost. Bai Zixian, are you sure you're stronger than me? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he nodded at Qin Qinglan with a smile, indicating that she should not interfere again. Then, he turned to look at Bai Zixian and said, Of course. Bai Zixian's eyes flashed with confidence. Obviously, he was full of confidence. This time, after returning from the trial, his strength had greatly increased, and he had reached the peak of the 4th stage Heaven stage Immortal Realm. He might even step into the 5th stage Immortal Realm at any time. Such talent was rare in the entire Immortal Qi continent. And Nie Tian, who seemed to be about the same age as him, had the strength to fight against a mortal stage Immortal Realm. Well, I'll give you a chance. Nie Tian smiled and lightly stepped on the ground. Sword Qi overflowed, and he drew a 1-meter square circle on the ground. He said, I'm standing in this circle. You have to make 3 moves. If you can force me out of the circle, you win, and I'll leave the Fengtian sect immediately. If you can't, get lost. His deep voice was filled with unconcealable arrogance and contempt. Everyone was shocked, and then they couldn't help but discuss. Is this guy crazy? How dare he look down on Bai Zixian like this? The circle under his feet is only 1 meter square. He can easily push it out. Sure enough, he's a fool from the outside world. He doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He's really courting death. Qin Qinglan was also stunned. She didn't expect Nie Tian to be so arrogant. Although she had seen Nie Tian's strength with her own eyes, She didn't believe that Nie Tian could take 3 moves from Bai Zixian in a 1-meter square circle. One should know that Bai Zixian was a genius of the immortal Tao. His strength was probably stronger than many immortals of the previous generation. However, Qing Qi and Mo Rushi weren't nervous at all. Instead, they were smiling. Obviously, they were very confident in Nie Tian. Boy, you asked for it. It was the first time that Bai Zixian was looked down upon like this. He was furious. His immortal force surged around him, and he growled, "I only need 1 move to kill you." Boom. As soon as his voice fell, Bai Zixian slapped out with his palm. His immortal force rolled out and formed the shape of a dragon and tiger in the void. The roar of the dragon and tiger rang in everyone's ears.